A young man found himself reincarnated into another world, awakening an extraordinary ability called water manipulation. This skill did not merely grant him control over water, it also allowed him to tame fierce aquatic beasts, turning them into his loyal companions. However, he did not stop there. He pushed these creatures beyond their natural limits, evolving them into terrifying sea monsters. The story unfolded in a distant land where Leang stood in a daze, mesmerized by the breathtaking view of the rising sun. The golden light painted the sky, and the crisp morning air filled his lungs. It was a peaceful, surreal moment. Before he could lose himself completely in the scenery, his father's voice called out to him, snapping him back to reality. The sound, though seemingly unfamiliar at first, carried warmth and comfort. Without hesitation, he rushed to his father, determined to make the most of the day. That morning, they spent their time on the lake, checking their catch. It was an ordinary day, yet it held a simple joy, the kind he had not experienced in a long time. A crab latching onto his foot, his father nearly choking from laughter, and the playful scribbles they carved into their boat for no reason at all. It was enough to make him forget everything else. Time passed unnoticed until the sun began to set. Before heading back, they sat by the shore to enjoy the view a little longer. That was when he spotted a red carp swimming by, its scales shimmering under the fading sunlight. It was a rare sight, and without thinking twice, Leang dived into the water. The moment he hit the surface, the fish vanished, and with it, the lake was eerily empty, devoid of any signs of life. No matter how hard he tried, he could not move forward, as though something held him in place. Suddenly, his chest tightened, his limbs grew heavy, and all he could think about was hoping his father would pull him out. But the world around him dimmed, and in an instant, he woke up, except his father was no longer there. Instead, two strangers stood before him. Reality sank in. The day he had spent with his father had been nothing more than a dream. In truth, he had been captured, bound by these men. Zhang, the one he had trusted, had deceived him. Rather than guiding them as he had believed, they had only used him as bait for a water monster. It was a cruel fate, yet Leang remained calm. This was not his first life. Leang was a transmigrator from another world. A month had passed since he had arrived in this realm, taking over this body. The original owner had perished from illness, and somehow he had ended up in his place. His mother had died in childbirth, leaving him to be raised by his father alone. For years, it had just been the two of them, until 3 months ago, when his father succumbed to a respiratory disease. Now, all the emotions, grief, loneliness, and longing had become his own. He had never known what it was like to grow up with a family, yet in the past month, he had adapted to the former owner's relationships and daily life. During this time, he had also made a startling discovery. This world was anything but ordinary. It possessed extraordinary powers, where people trained their bodies and minds to surpass human limits. Those who succeeded were known as cultivators, but it was not just humans who could evolve through training. Animals could as well. Those who did became mythical beasts. As if on cue, a creature emerged from the depths of the lake. Even Zhang, a seasoned cultivator, felt his legs go weak at the sight of it. He had expected the water beast to be no longer than half a meter, but the information had been entirely wrong. When it surfaced, it easily rocked the boat, sending waves of panic through everyone on board. Still, Yang was not one to back down without a fight. He had trained for 10 years, and if the beast wished to devour them, it would have to work for it. The second the creature lunged, Yang retaliated, unleashing his most powerful attack. But the beast was colossal. Its jaws alone dwarfed him. Before he could even register what was happening, he was gone, swallowed whole like a mere snack. The impact shattered the boat into pieces, sending the remaining man into absolute panic. This was never part of the plan. He had no intention of dying here. Desperation took over, and in a last-ditch effort to save himself, he stabbed Liang's hand and threw him into the water, hoping the scent of blood would serve as a distraction. Bound by restraints, Leang sank rapidly, but he refused to surrender. He thrashed against the ropes, biting into the rough fibers. After several agonizing moments, they loosened just enough for him to break free. However, another problem arose. His oxygen was running out, and he had already sunk too deep. Darkness crept into his vision, and just as he was about to lose consciousness, a vision appeared stood before him, his father's arm reaching out. He knew it wasn't real, yet his body reacted instinctively, stretching his hand forward. To his surprise, he grasped something solid, a log, the very same one from his father's boat, the one they had carved their faces into all those years ago. A rush of emotions, gratitude, relief, and even warmth, despite the freezing water, overwhelmed him. Somehow, even in death, his father had saved him once again. But the moment was short-lived. The scent of his blood had spread, and the monster had caught it. Before he could react, sharp teeth clamped onto his leg, dragging him further into the depth. The pressure in his chest built, the light above faded completely, and he was pulled into the beast's lair. The sight before him sent a chill down his spine. Countless bodies long devoured, wrecked boats reduced to fragments, and piles of treasure glimmering like a cruel joke in the darkness. He had done everything he could to survive, but now it was clear there was no escape. With his last breath, he closed his eyes and whispered a silent apology to his father. Soon he would be joining him, but the water beast had other plans. Instead of finishing him off, it slammed him to the ground, toying with him like a predator playing with its food. Pain erupted through his body, but then something unexpected occurred. His blood, drifting through the water, seeped into the lake bed and touched something ancient, an artifact buried beneath the wreckage, a water cauldron. At that moment, an ancient being stirred. A surge of power coursed through Liang's body, foreign yet strangely familiar. The energy adapted to him, shaping itself into something he could instinctively understand. It resembled the game systems he had once played before transmigrating, and in that instant, his ability awakened: water manipulation. The change was immediate. The water surrounding Leang was no longer his enemy. It had become his domain. His wounds closed, his body strengthened, and suddenly it felt as though he was standing on solid ground. The resistance of the water seemed to vanish, leaving him to question how any of this was possible. As if in response to his thoughts, a system notification appeared, explaining everything. He had obtained a skill called water control, which granted him the ability to manipulate water currents and breathe underwater. It was a powerful skill, one that transformed the depths of the lake into his battlefield. Before Leang could fully process his newfound abilities, the beast struck again, lunging forward to devour him. But this time, Leang was no longer helpless. With a mere thought, the water twisted and surged, catching the beast mid-swim and suspending it in place. A rush of power filled him, an intoxicating sensation that made him realize he had no limits underwater. However, reality quickly set in. This power was new, and his control over it was far from perfect. The beast struggled, breaking free from his grip, and lunged again. Yet with his newfound mobility, Liang easily dodged the attack, slipping through the water as if it were second nature. Still, dodging alone wouldn't be enough. Without a weapon, Liang needed another way to defeat the beast. Just as that thought crossed his mind, the system responded. It turned out he wasn't just a simple water manipulator. He had another skill called blood domination, which allowed him to inscribe ancient runes using his own blood, forming contracts with aquatic spirit beasts. This revelation made his pulse quicken. It was exactly what he needed. In an instant, he formulated a plan. The moment the beast surged toward him again, Liang used water control to halt its movement just long enough to inscribe the necessary runes, creating a blood domination talisman. As soon as the beast broke free from his water hold, Liang weaved around its massive form and slammed the talisman onto its head. However, forming a contract was easier said than done. It became a battle of spiritual force. The beast fought back, lashing out with the intent to crush Liang's very soul. His vision darkened, his body stiffened, and for a moment, it felt as though the creature's will was overwhelming his own. But Leang had an advantage. His soul had lived twice. Drawing on its combined strength, he pushed back. His soul energy surged, overpowering the beast's resistance. In the end, he emerged victorious. The contract was sealed, and Liang floated back to the surface, breaking through the water with a deep, desperate inhale. The air filled his lungs, and for the first time since the ordeal began, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The beast emerged right after him, no longer an enemy but an ally. Its massive form loomed over the lake, its eyes locked onto Liang with newfound reverence. It had fully submitted to him. However, there was one problem. Liang couldn't exactly stroll back into the village with a gigantic water beast at his side. That would cause all kinds of trouble. Through their newly formed spiritual link, He ordered the beast to stay behind, summoning it only when needed. With that, the beast disappeared into the depths, retreating to its hidden lair, a good place to lay low. As for Leang, it was time to leave. The next day, the old man who had thrown him into the lake as bait arrived at the village, dragging along his crew and steward Jung. They weren't there to offer condolences, assuming Leang was already dead. Instead, the old man had his sights set on something else, Leang's father's fortune. In his mind, it was compensation for the botched mission. After all, their plan had failed, Xiao was dead, and someone had to pay for it. With that in mind, they marched straight to Liang's house. The moment they reached the door, they kicked it wide open, expecting an empty room. Instead, they froze. Standing right there was Leang, alive and well. For a moment, the entire group stood in stunned silence, their faces frozen in disbelief. However, the shock was short-lived. Steward Young's expression twisted into one of pure rage, directed squarely at the old Geyer. The steward had failed to verify the facts, but it didn't matter. He was already convinced that Liang Ku was responsible for the botched mission. Someone had to take the blame, and Young didn't hesitate to order his men to restrain Liang and teach him a harsh lesson. The death of Jiao wasn't just an inconvenience. It had cost Young a significant amount of money. To make matters worse, the entire village was now in danger because the beast was still at large. According to Jung and his men, all of this was Liang's fault, a claim that was entirely baseless. Liang vehemently refuted the accusations, shifting the blame back onto the old man. But the old Geyer was far too cunning to be cornered so easily. Instead, the old man flipped the script, pointing out Liang's miraculous survival. How could a mere brat like him return alive unless he had been working with the beast? With that, the accusation took a darker turn. Liang was no longer just a troublemaker. He was now being labeled a monster. The old man claimed that Liang had controlled the water beast and was responsible for Jiao's death. It was an absurd accusation, but Liang was no stranger to being labeled a freak. In his previous life, Liang had been an orphan, and the other children had treated him like a bad omen, a walking misfortune. Rumors had spread that orphans were cursed or prone to stealing, and no matter what he did, the stigma had never left him. But Liang wasn't the type to roll over and accept such treatment. He had endured enough in his past life, and he refused to be pushed around in this one, especially by someone as despicable as the old Geyer, who was already missing a tooth. Liang decided then and there that he would help the old man lose a few more. Without hesitation, Liang tackled the old Geyer, shoving him back with enough force to send him stumbling. He then locked onto the nearest basin of water. If they wanted him to be a monster so badly, fine. He would show them what a real monster looked like. Water surged up his arm, twisting and coiling like a living serpent. His anger sharpened his focus, and for a moment, he was ready to take every single one of them down with him. But just as he was about to unleash his power, his childhood friend arrived, rushing in alongside the village chief. The chief's voice cut through the chaos, carrying an authority that even Steward Young couldn't ignore. Though the chief appeared ancient, he was still an official of the dynasty, a figure of real power. This meant Jung had no choice but to comply. Before storming off, however, Jung shot the chief a venomous glare, vowing that his master, Xiao, would hear about this. The old Geyer, however, remained unfazed. He knew it was an empty threat. Even Jung's master would bow to the chief's authority. Once the confrontation had settled, Liang let out a slow breath and turned to the village chief, offering a nod of gratitude. With nothing else left to do, they left the scene. But Liang knew better. This wasn't the end. Situations like this would keep happening unless he took matters into his own hands. Determined to survive in this world, Liang made a decision. He would use his system to its fullest potential and grow stronger as quickly as possible. It was then that he noticed something strange. His water essence was increasing. At first he wasn't sure why, but then it clicked. His crocodile pet had something to do with it. Intrigued, Liang waited for nightfall before returning to the lake. Once there, he activated his spirit link to summon his water beast. When the creature finally surfaced, it was bite-sized, completely surprising Liang. Just as he was about to ask questions, the system chimed in, explaining that subdued and contracted beasts could adjust their body size at will to manage energy consumption. This made sense to Liang, but he wasn't there to admire his pet's new party trick. He wanted to uncover the source of the water essence he had sensed. Without delay, Liang commanded his small companion to lead the way. The crocodile dove into the water and Liang followed closely. The water beast guided him deeper into the lake, weaving through the murky depths until they slipped into a hidden underwater cave. The moment Liang stepped inside, his eyes widened in astonishment. Countless legendary spirit plants sprawled across the cave floor, glowing faintly with rich spiritual energy. He reached out, brushing his fingers against one, and immediately a system prompt appeared, offering him the option to absorb it. This was a loot drop Leang couldn't afford to pass up. In this world, spiritual materials and treasures absorbed extraordinary energies over time, making them incredibly valuable. Spirit plants in particular possessed unique effects depending on their properties. Rumor had it that in Gia Manor's backyard, there was a frozen pond where special vines grew at the bottom. These vines were so rare and powerful that Master Xiao used them to lure cultivators into servitude. Yet here Liang stood surrounded by a cave full of them. Absorbing these plants would undoubtedly boost his water essence exactly what he needed. Without wasting any time, Liang got to work. He gathered as many plants as he could. He briefly considered asking his beast for help, but when he glanced over, the crocodile was already bloated, having eaten a few plants itself. Seeing it floating around, clearly full and content, Liang decided to let it rest. After all, it had earned a nap for leading him to such a treasure trove. Once he had gathered everything, Liang began devouring the plants. With just one plant, his water essence increased by 1. Not only were these spirit plants incredibly beneficial, but they were also delicious, making it far too easy for him to consume them one after another. He kept eating, absorbing as much water essence as possible. The more he accumulated, the stronger his fusion with aquatic spirits would become, and the faster his aquatic beasts could evolve. There were so many plants that, for a moment, Liang felt like he had overindulged. But it was worth it. He had gained 25 water essence. Without hesitation, he invested it into his fusion with the water monkey bloodline, increasing it from 5% to 7.5%. This significant boost in power filled him with confidence. If he ever encountered those adversaries from before, he was certain he could take them on easily. However, that confrontation would have to wait. Leang had a more pressing issue. He was broke. Autumn was coming to an end, and during this season, crocodiles slowed down due to hibernation, meaning he couldn't rely on them for hunting. With time running out, Leang devised a simple plan. Exploit the crocodiles now and gather as much profit as possible before they became useless. With this in mind, he commanded his crocodile to hunt as many fish as it could. Soon, he had stacked up a huge haul, which he sold to the merchants. Unlike the hustling vendors from his previous life, the merchants in this world were far easier to negotiate with. Just like that, Liang's financial struggles were resolved. Now it was time to settle things with the old man who had tried to set him up. But before Liang could make a move, the old man played right into his hands. Apparently, the old man had been searching for Liang to apologize for their earlier misunderstanding. To show his sincerity, he invited Liang to a meal on his boat, just the two of them. Liang nearly laughed out loud at the blatant transparency of the old man's scheme. Instead of calling him out, however, Liang decided to play along. After all, this was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. A few hours before the meetup, the old geezer found himself in a dire situation. The steward's men had beaten him to a pulp for his failure. For the first time ever, the steward had been publicly humiliated in front of so many people, and he wasn't about to let that slide. However, killing the old man now would have been a waste. Their master Xiao still had use for him. Xiao needed specific materials to refine his pills materials that weren't easy to come by. Specifically, he needed a true orphan child. The old geezer was tasked with abducting Liang to send a clear message that they were not to be trifled with and to secure the rare material Xiao required. If he succeeded, he was promised immortality, a reward that drove him to the brink of madness. In his desperation, he even accepted a power-boosting seal, a dangerous tool that would temporarily push his strength far beyond its limits, just for this one mission. With this newfound confidence, the old man believed capturing Liang alive would be easy. However, instead of resorting to brute force, he decided to take a smarter approach: poison. His plan was simple: soup with a toxin that wouldn't kill him, but would weaken him enough to prevent resistance or screams. Unfortunately for the old man, Liang had no patience for such tricks. Instead of taking a sip, Liang chose violence. With a flick of his hand, a stream of water shot out, wrapping around the old man's head and suffocating him on the spot. The old man struggled, clawing at the invisible grip tightening around his face, but it was useless. He couldn't even scream. Then everything went black. The next thing the old man knew, he was waking up in darkness. Night had fallen, his body ached, his mind spun, and to his horror, he was tied up. Desperate, he tried to play innocent, asking Leang what he planned to do. But Leang wasn't fooled. He already had proof that the old man had been bribed. With this knowledge, Leang knew exactly what to do. He had the perfect place for people like the old man, the same spot where they had first encountered the water beast. Except this time the beast belonged to Leang. The old man, realizing the gravity of his situation, suddenly had a change of heart. He claimed he never wanted Leang to become a monster, and began apologizing profusely, promising to tell Leang everything if he spared his life. Surprisingly, Leang agreed, prompting the old man to spill the truth. He revealed that the steward wanted to abduct Leang, along with other orphans, because to the Jiao mansion they weren't people, they were materials. Specifically, they were ingredients needed to refine a celestial pill, a pill that could grant immortality. As soon as the old man finished speaking, he realized the gravity of his confession. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he claimed he was also a victim, forced into this role by the steward. But Leang didn't care. Whether forced or not, the old man knew too much, and that alone sealed his fate. No matter what excuses he made, he wasn't leaving alive. However, Leang knew this wasn't the end. The Xiao family's influence was vast, and the old man's sudden disappearance would eventually lead them straight to him. When that happened, Leang needed a way out. His only option now was to become a cultivator and fast. The quickest way to do that was to join a martial arts school. In the city of Pingyang, there were 3 prominent martial schools, but only one stood above the rest, the Yang School. It was widely known that the master of the Yang School possessed a legendary ability, the power to break gold and stone with his bare hands. This extraordinary skill and the school's formidable reputation kept it at the pinnacle of martial prowess. Leang believed that if he could join the Yang School, the Zhao family would think twice before targeting him. After all, if a member of the school were to disappear, the Yang School would not let such an offense go unnoticed. However, the main obstacle was the school's steep admission requirements. To gain entry, Leang needed at least 8 taels of silver, but he currently had only 2. Realizing he needed to earn more money quickly, he decided to return to hunting. Over the past few days, his swimming skills had improved significantly, largely thanks to his pet, which had become his sparring partner for speed training. Through this practice, Leang had developed a unique technique. By using his water control energy, he compressed water beneath his feet and released it all at once, propelling himself forward with a burst of speed. The downside was that the technique drained his energy rapidly and could only be used for short bursts. Still, it was effective for quick maneuvers. Just as Leang was preparing for another routine hunt, something unusual caught his attention. A peculiar fish glowing bright red swam into view. This was no ordinary fish. It was a spiritual fish. In this world, certain creatures could evolve under the influence of special energy, mutating into extraordinary forms. Examples included giant scorpion beetles, 2-headed razor-toothed sharks, and iron-fin whales. Spotting 2 spiritual fish right in front of him, Leang recognized this as an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. Without hesitation, he ordered his crocodile companion to revert to its original size and chase one of the fish while he pursued the other. Using his newly developed technique, Leang quickly closed the distance. With a swift motion, he manipulated the water to create a bubble, trapping the fish and preventing it from escaping. Catching it proved surprisingly easy, and Leang felt a surge of triumph. But just as he began to celebrate, a powerful presence stirred in the depths below, signaling that greater challenges and dangers lay ahead. Leang had just placed the fish into his basket when, without warning, a massive water beast emerged from the depths. The creature swiftly wrapped itself around him and slammed him straight into the lake bed. The impact startled him, but he knew this wasn't the time to lose consciousness. Summoning his focus, Leang locked in and quickly realized he was facing the infamous 6-barbed fish, a fearsome predator known for devouring humans. To make matters worse, the beast possessed abilities eerily similar to his own. It conjured a massive water orb, preparing to launch a devastating attack. However, Liang's power far surpassed the creature's. With a swift motion, he shattered the orb before it could fully charge. This only enraged the beast further. It lashed out with its tail, but thankfully, the croc intervened just in time, intercepting the blow. Before the beast could recover, the croc unleashed a powerful move, the primary Lotus Special, slamming the creature into the ground. Seizing the opportunity, Leang stepped in, attempting to capture the beast using his blood talisman. However, the water beast's spiritual energy proved far stronger than the croc's, and things quickly took a turn for the worse. Leang's body began to spasm uncontrollably as his system crashed, flooding him with warning messages about mental overload. Despite the overwhelming strain, he refused to back down. He knew that if he failed, the beast would undoubtedly devour them both. Fueled by sheer willpower and an unyielding desire to survive, Leang pushed through the pain. In the end, his determination paid off, and he successfully subdued the creature. Much like the croc, the beast instantly shrank into a smaller, chunky form to conserve energy. Leang couldn't help but notice its round, pudgy appearance, which reminded him of a potential evolution, a tiger-head whale. Deciding that Chuni was the perfect name for the creature, Leang felt a sense of accomplishment. With the beast now under control, he turned his attention to the loot. True to form, the croc had managed to capture another spiritual fish during the chaos. Leang gave the croc a well-deserved pat on the head, feeling grateful for its assistance. To celebrate their victory, Leang decided to cook some of the fish. He also prepared a smaller spiritual fish, hoping to extract water essence from it. To his delight, the attempt was successful, yielding 18 points of water essence. The result left him ecstatic. If a small spirit fish could provide such a substantial amount, a larger one would likely yield triple that, enough to potentially break past a 10% fusion rate. Despite the temptation to use the essence immediately, Liang knew he had other priorities. He needed money to enroll in school, and that required careful planning. For now, he decided to hold back and focus on securing the funds he needed. The path ahead was challenging, but Liang was determined to succeed. Leang had just entered the Yixing market, where a massive crowd had gathered to buy goods. He had come to sell his spiritual fish, confident that this was the perfect place to attract the right customers. However, he was caught off guard by the sheer number of people packed into the marketplace, making him wonder if there was some kind of celebration happening. That's when he spotted a man holding up another spiritual fish. It didn't take long for Liang to figure out what was going on. A member of the Chen family had arrived, and he had brought his own spiritual fish to show off. That explained why the crowd was so large. Instead of feeling discouraged, Liang grew even more excited. This was the perfect opportunity. Without wasting a second, he pushed his way through the crowd, eager to see what the man had caught. Of course, Liang wasn't there just to spectate. He was a master manipulator, so the moment he got close, he made sure to use the limelight, proudly displaying the spirit fish he had caught. But to his surprise, instead of drawing excitement, the crowd reacted with confusion. His fish wasn't met with awe, but with outright rejection. People started saying it didn't look like a spiritual fish at all, just some ugly, deformed creature that only a clueless newbie would bother catching. Before he knew it, the mockery began. The crowd didn't hold back, openly laughing at him. Even Chen, the so-called expert in spirit fish, was smirking, as if he were watching a fool embarrass himself. Just then, a cultivator arrived, instantly drawing the attention of the crowd. It was Hu Qi, a respected master from the Yang martial arts school. Since Chen was standing closer, the cultivator's gaze naturally fell on the crimson bloodfish in his hands. Without hesitation, Hu Qi asked for the price. Recognizing the man's high status, Chen didn't dare throw out a number himself. Instead, he humbly let the cultivator decide what he thought was fair. With that, Hu Qi casually offered 3 taels. The moment the words left his mouth, Chen's eyes widened. This amount was far more than he had ever expected. But just as the deal was about to be finalized, Liang suddenly whipped out his own fish for the cultivator to see. The onlookers, still riding high on their mockery, thought Liang was setting himself up for further humiliation. Some even chuckled, convinced he was about to be completely shut down. However, the cultivator's reaction was the complete opposite. The moment his eyes landed on Leang's creature, he was visibly excited. He identified it as a horned pommet, a rare and highly valued spirit fish. Without hesitation, Hu Qi offered 6 taels for it. The entire market was stunned. They had been completely wrong, and the amount of money offered was more than what most families could save in generations. Now they realized who the foolish one really was, and it definitely wasn't Leang. Even Chen, who had just been basking in his own success, was left speechless. No amount of arrogance could cover the fact that Leang had outshined him completely. However, with such a large sum of money, shock quickly turned to envy. One man in the crowd even made a veiled threat against Leang, disguising it as a joke. But Leang didn't let it bother him. He simply went on with the transaction, completely unbothered by the stares. With that, Chen had no choice but to back away, knowing full well that his fish was no longer of any interest to the cultivator. But before handing over the fish, Leang, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to dig for more information. If his fish was worth double the price of a crimson blood fish, he wanted to know why. Casually, he asked Hu Qi about it. Luckily for him, the cultivator was in a good mood and didn't mind explaining. It turned out that the horned pommet was a key ingredient in medicine used to craft special pills. These pills weren't just ordinary supplements. They strengthened essence and refined energy, helping cultivators break through the blood flow barrier, a crucial stage in martial cultivation. As fate would have it, Hu Qi was currently at that exact bottleneck, making the fish extremely useful to him. With this, Leang's perspective widened. He had only been thinking about selling fish for money, but now he realized their true value in cultivation. This was huge. Grateful for the insight, he sincerely thanked the cultivator, knowing that this knowledge would serve him well in the future. A little while later, Leang sat in an alley, counting his money, when someone appeared behind him. It was Libo, his childhood friend, who had come looking for him after hearing about what had happened. Libo congratulated Leang for bringing pride to their village, something Leang definitely appreciated. Seizing the opportunity, Leang also took a moment to thank Libo for bringing the village chief when he needed help. As a friend, Libo couldn't resist teasing him, saying that if Leang was truly grateful, he should hand over the 6 taels of silver he had just earned. Obviously, Leang ignored that completely, and instead got straight to the point, asking how much it cost to enroll in the Yang martial arts school. To his surprise, Libo grew really excited, especially since his father was about to send him there as well. The school charged 7 taels of silver for basic enrollment without lodging or meals, 10 taels if those were included, and 20 taels if one wanted to add medicinal baths to their training. While it was pricier than other schools, it was also the most prestigious, making it worth the cost. Leang agreed and couldn't help but smile, realizing he could definitely afford to enroll with his current budget. With everything he had earned over the past few days, he had gathered 9 taels of silver in total. Without hesitation, he told Libo they could sign up together the next day, which excited his friend even more since the timing worked out perfectly for both of them. But just as the moment felt right, their excitement was cut short. Liang's passive ability suddenly activated, sharpening his senses in a way that sent a chill down his spine. He could overhear conversations of people nearby as long as they were close to a water source. And this time, the voices came from none other than the Shao Manor. What he heard made his stomach drop. They weren't just talking about something random. They were specifically tracking him down. This was bad. Absolutely bad. If they were already onto him, he needed to power up fast. Without wasting another moment, as soon as night fell, Leang returned to the lake. To his surprise, Chunky had managed to catch another spirit fish. Without hesitation, Leang decided to prepare it. Unlike a brute who might devour it raw, he took the time to cook it properly, seasoning it and turning it into a soup. The result was extraordinary. The flavors blended harmoniously, creating an unbelievably rich taste that filled his mouth with every spoonful. The aroma was so enticing that his pets were practically drooling, their eyes locked on the delicious meal before them. Fortunately, Leang was not one to hoard good food. He generously shared portions with his companions, ensuring everyone was satisfied. The meal was not only fulfilling, but also rewarding. The spirit fish granted him 24 water essences, a significant increase compared to the 18 essences he had gained from the horned Pimit earlier. Without delay, Leang used the essences to refine his power. As expected, the energy surging through him was far stronger than before. His fusion rate had now reached nearly 12%, filling him with an eagerness to test his newfound strength in a fight. Additionally, his water control had improved considerably. He realized he could effortlessly lift Chunky high into the air if he wished. However, as he observed his beast companion, something else caught his attention. Their evolution requirement had decreased from 800 to 779. This revelation astonished him. The only thing he had done was feed them, yet the requirement had dropped significantly. This discovery made him realize the immense value of the water cauldron, far beyond his initial expectations. It left him wondering about its origins. Was it a natural creation or the work of something greater? The answer, he believed, lay within the cauldron itself. Summoning the cauldron for a closer inspection, Leang noticed intricate carvings that piqued his curiosity. On one side was a water monkey, while the other featured a winged dragon. Other strange creatures were also depicted, including one with a human head and a snake's body, as well as a mysterious robed figure. These engravings hinted at the cauldron's true nature, but Leang knew better than to jump to conclusions. Overthinking would not serve him well at this moment. He needed to stay focused, especially since he was about to enroll in a martial arts school the following day. The next day arrived swiftly. Leang and Libo were traveling through the mountains in a carriage. While Leang was composed, Libo's boundless enthusiasm was almost overwhelming. The younger boy was practically bouncing in his seat, far too excited for the journey. Leang couldn't help but wonder if he should have made the trip alone. After some time, they arrived at Pinyang City, a bustling hub where people from various villages gathered to trade goods. The streets were packed, filled with the chatter of merchants and the enticing aroma of freshly cooked street food. The vibrant atmosphere captivated the two travelers, and they decided to take a detour to explore. They sampled different foods, admired unique handcrafted art, and even stumbled upon a bizarre display of strength, a man lying on bricks while a muscular individual hammered him with a heavy object. It was a shocking sight, to say the least. Meanwhile, as they wandered through the city, a group of men was plotting something far less innocent. They had been eyeing Liang's money for some time and had initially planned to rob him the previous day. However, after overhearing that Leang and Libo were headed to the Yang Martial Arts School, they realized there was an even greater opportunity. 2 bags of money instead of 1. The thought alone made them salivate with greed. Even if they sold their wives, they would never come close to such wealth. The temptation to take it for themselves was too great to resist. Some of the men hesitated, fearing the consequences if they were caught by the magistrate's office. However, their leader dismissed their concerns with a grin, assuring them that things would not escalate that far. He promised to take care of the bodies himself, confident that no one would ever discover their crime. The gang predicted that Leang and Libo would take the shortest route to the school, a little-used shortcut that was the perfect spot for an ambush. As expected, the two travelers eventually appeared on the path. Without wasting a second, the gang stepped out to intercept them, blocking their way with smug grins. They demanded money, giving Leang and Libo 2 options: hand it over willingly or end up buried by the roadside. The men laughed as they delivered their ultimatum, treating the situation as if it were some twisted joke. Unfortunately for them, the joke was about to backfire. Leang was not amused. Instead, he wore a devious smile as he made his decision. If they were so eager to bury someone by the roadside, he would gladly grant them their wish, but it would be their own graves they dug. They were about to face the consequences of their actions. The thugs were immediately enraged, and without hesitation, they lunged at Leang. However, Leang swiftly appeared in front of them, landing a powerful right hook before they could even complete their attack. His speed was astonishing. He noticed the second thug still mid-motion and, without missing a beat, slammed his elbow directly into the man's face. But Leang didn't stop there. Before the second thug could even hit the ground, Leang grabbed him by the hair as if he were nothing more than a rag doll and hurled him straight into their leader. The leader stood there, dumbfounded and completely unprepared for the sheer force coming from someone who appeared to be just a kid. Before he could process what was happening, Liang's fist had already connected, smashing the leader's face into the ground with such brutality that it looked as though he were planting a tree. The impact was so severe that the leader's neck bent at an unnatural angle, leaving little doubt that no ordinary person could survive such a blow. Ironically, Liang hadn't even intended to strike that hard. He was as shocked as his friend, as this was his first real fight since leveling up. It was now clear that his physical abilities, along with his waterbending powers, had skyrocketed. Seeing what had just unfolded, Liang's friend couldn't contain his curiosity. He wondered when Leang had become so strong. For as long as he had known him, Leang had never displayed such power. Did he even need a master at this point? However, since Leang wasn't ready to reveal the truth, he simply shrugged it off with the weakest excuse imaginable. Apparently, he had been a genius all along. With that, they decided to get moving as they were already running late for school. Leang's friend, of course, wasn't buying the excuse for a second. He knew Leang well enough to understand that genius was the last word anyone would use to describe him. But since Leang wasn't ready to open up, his friend decided not to push the matter and respected his decision for the time being. With that, they continued their journey to the Yang sect and soon arrived at its entrance. There, they were greeted by a senior disciple named Xiang. After exchanging formal greetings, Xiang led them inside, guiding them to another instructor who would oversee their test and explain what it meant to be a member of the sect. This brought them to Senior Hu, a direct disciple of Master Yang. Senior Hu was not the ordinary-looking man one might expect, but rather someone with luxurious hair, the same man Liang had met at the market, the one who had purchased his fish. To Liang's surprise, Senior Hu was a natural teacher and, without hesitation, began his explanation. He explained that martial arts were divided into 4 stages. The skin barrier, which hardened the body like oxide, making the skin tough and resilient, greatly enhancing defense. The flesh barrier, which strengthened the muscles, allowing a person to lift a grown man with one hand as if it were nothing. The bone barrier, which unleashed power even more recklessly, making it possible to shatter stone and split monuments. And finally, the blood barrier, which represented the ultimate refinement, enhancing every aspect of the body like embroidery on silk. At its core, martial cultivation boiled down to one thing: refinement. However, for ordinary people, no matter how much they refined their bodies, there was always a limit. To break past that limit, 2 things were indispensable: technique and medicine. Seeing the curiosity in his junior's eyes, Senior Hu decided to give them an example. He brought up the Yang Martial Hall's 3-fist technique. With the right technique, a cult off to the side, a troublesome group led by Yankai from the same sect had locked eyes on Leang. From the way they carried themselves, it was obvious they were lackeys of the 3rd young master of the Jiao Manor, Suiyuan. Suiyuan had taken quite a liking to Liang, and as long as Yankai and his followers managed to get rid of him and his friend from the sect, Suiyuan had promised to grant them whatever they wanted. However, the real reason Suiyuan was so fixated on Liang wasn't just personal interest. There was more to it than met the eye. The Xiao Manor was not, in fact, producing pills to achieve immortality, at least not in the manner people assumed. Instead, they were crafting pills to heal Xiaoyuan, the younger brother of Master Xiao. Master Xiao believed that Liang was the perfect material for refining the elixir, primarily because Liang was the same age as Xiaoyuan. Since Xiaoyuan had been frail since childhood, finding a fetal pill from someone of the same age had become increasingly difficult. Liang, therefore, was the ideal candidate. However, there was a problem. Liang had joined the Yang sect, making it significantly harder to capture him. As a result, they needed to find another target, one who wouldn't be missed. Master Xiao had more or less abandoned the idea, but unfortunately, Xiaoyuan himself had overheard everything. Determined not to let some orphan children stand in his way, Xiaoyuan decided to take matters into his own hands. By handling the situation personally, he believed things would become much easier, and soon he would finally break free from his limitations and advance to his elixir aperture. Meanwhile, Liang and Libo had finished assessing their bone structures. Libo, however, was still in shock, utterly flabbergasted. The fact that Liang possessed a top-tier bone structure, while he himself only ranked at a mid-high tier, was unacceptable to him. Libo entertained the idea that the test might have been rigged, though he knew deep down that it wasn't. He had always believed that he and Liang were equals, but now it seemed as though he was merely a side character in his best friend's story. Despite his discouragement, Libo pushed those thoughts aside and pressed on. With the matter settled, the two were about to head to the training grounds when they encountered a familiar face, Chen Jie Chang, the same individual who had been selling spirit fish with Liang the other day. However, from the way Libo immediately stepped forward and began sizing him up, it was clear that Libo had a deeper history with Chang than Liang did. The animosity between them was palpable, and within seconds, the two were on the verge of fighting right then and there. Liang, realizing the potential consequences, intervened before things could escalate. If they had started throwing punches, they would have been in serious trouble. Once the tension subsided, Liang asked Chang if he was there to practice martial arts as well. Chang confirmed this, revealing that he and Liang shared the same goal. From the very beginning, Chang had been selling spirit fish to save up enough money to enter the school as soon as possible. This revelation was reassuring to Liang. The more people with the same determination, the better. Without hesitation, Liang invited Chang to join them, especially since Senior Hu was teaching at the training grounds. They couldn't afford to miss such an opportunity. With that, they joined the other members for training. However, as newcomers, the intensity of the training was far beyond anything they had anticipated. Their muscles spasmed uncontrollably, their limbs felt like jelly, and their breaths came in ragged gasps. Just when they were on the verge of collapsing, Senior Hu called for a break, sparing them from complete exhaustion. But the training wasn't over yet. Instructor Lu would be taking over in the afternoon, meaning they had only a brief moment to recover before being thrown back into the grind. At this point, Libo was already considering quitting as the pain was unbearable. Cheng, overhearing this, burst into laughter and called Libo weak-willed without hesitation. Before they could properly catch their breath, trouble arrived in the form of Yang Chai and his lackey. The duo began pestering them immediately, throwing insults and acting as though they owned the place. To make matters worse, they had the audacity to demand 100 coins from Liang and his friends as a donation, claiming that paying up would allow them to stay in the sect. This demand was utterly ridiculous, and Libo was ready to throw hands on the spot, despite knowing his skills weren't on par with theirs. He didn't care. He just wanted the satisfaction of punching at least one of them in the face. However, the more level-headed Chang stopped him, pointing out that picking a fight there would not only be reckless, but also cause unnecessary trouble for Senior Hu, which was the last thing they needed. Even Liang hesitated. He wasn't the type to back down, but with his current strength, he wasn't sure if he could handle 3 cultivators at once. Just as he feared, Yang Chai seized the moment to boast loudly, declaring that he was about to break through the skin barrier and was itching to test it out on newcomers like them. It was a fight they couldn't win. If only they had been near a river, Leang might have had a fighting chance. But in their current state, it was a losing battle from the start. Thankfully, Senior Hu returned to check on the newcomers, putting a stop to the confrontation before it could escalate further. Not only did he shut down the nonsense, but he also ensured that Yang Kai and his lackey were punished for their antics. This only fueled Yang Kai's hatred for Liang and his friends, and they hurled empty threats before finally backing down. Senior Hu, however, wasn't playing around. He made sure their punishment was severe. But things weren't as simple as they seemed. As they left, Liang overheard something through his passive skill that immediately put him on edge. Someone nearby was talking about him, and from the tone of their voice, it was clear they were still targeting him, even after he had joined the Yang sect. They sounded desperate, which was a bad sign. If they were this persistent, it meant they wouldn't hesitate to strike when he was vulnerable, and his friends could end up caught in the crossfire. Without wasting time, Liang quickly told the others he had something to take care of and would be heading home for a bit in the afternoon. He bolted out of there, planning to go to the lotus pond, where he would have the advantage and where there would be no witnesses to see what he was about to unleash. A short while later, as night descended, Libo and Ji Chang were leisurely walking around the sect grounds. Libo began to express concern over Liang's prolonged absence, wondering aloud why he hadn't returned yet. Ji Chang, as usual, didn't miss the opportunity to tease him, comparing his worry to that of someone missing their boyfriend. This remark instantly infuriated Libo, and the two were on the verge of another heated argument. However, before their bickering could escalate, a sudden burst of applause interrupted them, drawing their attention elsewhere. It turned out to be Yan Kai, accompanied by his crew, and it was clear he was determined to settle the unfinished business from earlier. Without hesitation, Yan Kai launched into an assault, pummeling Libo and Jie Chang as if they were mere punching bags. Yet this wasn't enough to satisfy him. His true target, Leang, was still absent. After delivering a few more blows for good measure, Yan Kai turned to Ji Chang and demanded to know Liang's whereabouts. Ji Chang, however, refused to betray his friend. Instead, he grabbed the nearest brick and hurled it directly at Yan Kai's face. Unfortunately, Yan Kai's resilience surpassed expectations. The blow didn't even faze him. If anything, it only fueled his anger. He retaliated by slamming Ji Chang's face into the ground, making it abundantly clear who held the upper hand. But Yan Kai wasn't done. Feeling particularly spiteful, he decided to take things further, knowing full well that excessive violence would likely result in punishment. Yet his impulsive thoughts prevailed. He ordered his minions to guard the gate while he dealt with the situation personally. As his followers nodded and prepared to comply, Libo attempted to fight back. However, his efforts were futile. Charging at an opponent who was smirking at him should have been a clear sign to retreat. But Libo pressed on, paying the price for his defiance. Yan Kai twisted his arm with such force that it might as well have been a lever, then slammed him to the ground, pinning him in a humiliating position. Yan Kai's focus, however, remained on Jie Chang, the one who had dared to strike him with a brick. If Ji Chang wanted to play dirty, Yan Kai was more than willing to reciprocate. This time, he wasn't just aiming to inflict pain, he intended to make it personal. He taunted Jie Chang, threatening to take one of his eyes, mocking how well he'd be able to train afterward. Meanwhile, Liang had finally returned to the lake, accompanied by his pets. Despite the calm surroundings, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. His usually fearless companions, Lazy Croc and Chunky, both formidable creatures nearing the skin realm, had been so terrified that they had sent him a distress signal. Whatever had frightened them wasn't an ordinary beast, it was a true monster. Realizing there was no escape, Liang resolved to confront the danger head-on. Upon reaching the area where the beast had last been spotted, he found no trace of the creature itself, only the extensive destruction it had left behind. The sheer scale of the damage indicated that the beast was massive, and Liang knew he had to act quickly. To maximize his chances, he transformed his pets back into their smaller, cuter forms and activated Aqua Vision. Thanks to recent upgrades in his fusion level, his underwater perception had expanded from 1 meter to 6, allowing him to observe the seabed with remarkable clarity. This enhancement made tracking the beast significantly easier. The moment he located it, however, his expression shifted. The creature far exceeded his expectations. It was an enormous crab, its massive claws and appendages dwarfing even his combined beasts. According to Instructor Hugh, any beast surpassing the skin realm was considered a spirit beast, and this crab had clearly reached that level. Yet, Liang reasoned that it couldn't be overwhelmingly powerful. Otherwise, Lazy Croc and Chunky wouldn't have escaped alive. Still, defeating it wouldn't be a simple task, especially without proper preparation. The odds were stacked against them, and Liang briefly questioned whether engaging the beast was wise, as it wasn't part of his original plan. However, uncertainty and danger had always been constants in his life. He believed that the most pivotal moments often arose from taking risks and adapting to unforeseen challenges. The pond was his domain, and he wasn't about to let go of what was rightfully his. With determination, he decided to confront the monster. Transforming his pets back into their original forms, he prepared for battle. Even underwater, their presence was awe-inspiring, exuding an aura of power and readiness. Without hesitation, Liang and his companions charged toward the crab at full speed. But the crab wasn't idle. It was ready to defend itself, setting the stage for a fierce confrontation. The massive creature raised one of its enormous claws, gripping a boulder tightly. It crushed the boulder and hurled it toward its enemies, embedding it with mana before launching it like a barrage of high-speed projectiles. The boulders rained down with terrifying speed, completely dispersing the advancing group. Realizing the danger, Leang quickly understood that they needed to target the crab's claws first. He ordered Lazy Croc to attack, commanding the beast to sink its massive fangs into the crab's armored limb in an attempt to break it. However, it soon became apparent that the attempt had failed. The crab's shell was ridiculously durable, almost invincible, making brute force ineffective. Leang quickly adapted his strategy. Using his water manipulation abilities, he suspended the crab's other claw in place, creating a brief opening. Seizing the opportunity, he directed Chunky to rush in and attack. The beast lunged forward, chomping down on one of the crab's eyes and tearing it out. Instead of weakening the monster, however, the injury only enraged it further, sending it into a violent frenzy. Leang struggled to maintain control, using his mental energy to hold the crab down, but his energy was draining rapidly. Before he knew it, the crab broke free from his restraint and went completely berserk, flailing its claws and stomping wildly. In its rampage, it destroyed several of Liang's precious spirit plants, which infuriated him. Before Liang could react, the massive crab charged at him with surprising speed. It struck him with tremendous force, sending him flying several feet away. Despite the brutal hit, Leang refused to be knocked out. Fueled by anger and determination, he forced himself to stay conscious and got back on his feet, ready to face the creature head-on. However, he knew brute force alone wouldn't work, so he took a moment to analyze the crab, searching for any weaknesses. He noticed that the crab instinctively protected its abdomen, even while sustaining injuries elsewhere. Realizing this had to be its weak spot, Liang saw his chance to strike. Gathering every last bit of his energy, Liang compressed the surrounding water, forming rings around his spear. Each ring added a burst of acceleration, significantly increasing the spear's penetration power. However, with his energy reserves nearly depleted, he could only manage 2 rings before blood began dripping from his nose. Despite the strain, he powered through and launched his spear straight at the crab's exposed abdomen. As he had predicted, the abdomen was far softer than the rest of its body. The spear tore through the crab's flesh, piercing cleanly through to the other side. Leang was ecstatic at his success, but there was no time to celebrate. His energy reserves were completely drained, and as soon as his adrenaline faded, his body gave out. He lost consciousness on the spot. When he finally opened his eyes, he found himself no longer underwater. At first he was confused, but he soon noticed Lazy Croc and Chunky nearby, realizing they had saved him once again. Grateful for their help, he reached out and gave them both a well-deserved pat on the head. However, the after effects of overusing his powers hit him hard. His head throbbed painfully, serving as a stark reminder that he needed to be more careful in the future. As Leang tried to push himself up, something caught his eye. At first, he wasn't sure what he was looking at, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was the demonic crab they had just fought. He was surprised that his pets had brought the massive creature up with them, but he was deeply thankful. The crab's body would provide an incredible amount of water essence once consumed, and since it was a spirit beast, its meat was sure to be delicious. The mere thought made his mouth water. However, his daydreaming was interrupted when Lazy Croc pointed at something inside the crab's body. Liang approached and noticed that the crab was actually a female. Nestled within its body was a cluster of crab eggs. Excitement surged through him. He had initially regretted not taming the great crab, as it could have significantly boosted his power. But with these eggs, he still had a chance to raise one as his own. The only problem was that he couldn't wait around for them to hatch naturally. The chances of the eggs surviving on their own were slim, and he didn't have the luxury of playing babysitter. This left him with only one option: using his Blood Dominion talisman in the hope of forcing an evolution. After engraving the seal onto one of the eggs, he held his breath and waited. At first, nothing happened, and he began to think the attempt had failed. But then the egg twitched. A tiny crab claw burst through the shell, cracking it open. Moments later, the egg split apart, revealing the cutest little crab Liang had ever seen. While Chunky was adorable, this tiny crab was on another level, making him want to wrap it in a blanket and protect it at all costs. However, its appearance was deceiving. This little creature had the potential to evolve into a stone crab king, just like the one Leang had fought. Leang had cooked the giant crab and wasted no time devouring it. The crab was not only delicious, but also brimming with water essence, and its effects were almost instantaneous. His fusion rate skyrocketed from 10% to an astonishing 36.6%, a leap he hadn't thought possible. The boost was so significant that the water monkey's power within him grew even more dominant, as if the two were inching closer to becoming one. Even the water monkey's instincts and combat senses seemed to flow through him more vividly than ever before. To top it off, his wounds had completely healed. His pets watched in awe as he stood there, water spiraling around him like a newly crowned god of the sea. It was hard to blame them. Leang looked nothing short of majestic. Once he fully adjusted to the fusion, Leang couldn't help but feel exhilarated by the results. While the physical enhancements were remarkable, the surge of energy he gained was something else entirely. For the first time, he could sense his own blood energy. If Instructor Wu's teachings were correct, this meant he was dangerously close to breaking through the skin barrier, perhaps even surpassing it. However, Leang knew he wouldn't have reached this level without his pets, so he made sure to share the remaining crab meat and eggs with them. This would accelerate their evolution, making their journey easier in the long run. Besides, the meat wouldn't stay fresh forever, and each egg contained only 6 points of water essence, making them hardly worth hoarding. As for the tiny crab perched on his shoulder, which he had named Fist due to its size, Leang chose not to feed it. Letting it eat its own kind felt too cruel, even for him. Despite the power boost, Leang knew he couldn't afford to grow complacent. The threat of the Zhao Manor still loomed over him. If he could break through the skin barrier within the next month, he would officially become a Marshall Hall student, and the Zhao family would no longer be able to touch him. With this thought in mind, Leang was eager to return to the sect. Tomorrow's morning practice couldn't come soon enough. Meanwhile, on Yankai's side of things, someone had taken notice of his actions and wasn't about to let it slide. That someone was Xiao Huai, who had no intention of allowing anyone to defy the Marshall Hall's rules. However, instead of backing down, Yankai met Xiao Huai with a smirk, completely unfazed. Even though he was standing in front of an instructor, Yankai knew Xiao Huai couldn't stop him. After all, Yankai was acting under the direct orders of the Zhao family's third young master. He believed Xiao Huai, whom he saw as nothing more than a dog, should know his place. If Xiao Huai knew what was good for him, he would stand down, unless he wanted Yankai to report his interference to the master. The look on Xiao Huai's face said it all. Yankai and his lackey wasted no time laughing at him, mocking the fact that no matter how much Xiao Huai acted like a Yang sect disciple, everyone knew he still belonged to the Zhao Manor. If the Zhao family hadn't taken in Xiao Huai and his father, he wouldn't even be in the sect. Besides, Xiao Huai's father was still living under their roof, which meant Xiao Huai had no real choice in the matter. Yankai knew this, and so did everyone else. Sure enough, Xiao Huai could only grit his teeth, his loyalty to the sect tested. In the end, he had no choice but to lower his head and mutter an apology. For Xiao Huai, as long as his family remained safe, he didn't care what happened to himself. Yankai, of course, found this even more amusing and mocked Xiao Huai further, calling him a coward and the Zhao family's lapdog. The irony was lost on Yankai and his lackey, who failed to see that they were in the exact same position. However, their arrogance was short-lived. A single glob of spit to the face was enough to knock them off their high horses. Despite all their boasting about their strength, but no matter how much Jie Chong wanted to resist, he was still the weaker one here. Yankai was the one standing, and he decided a lesson needed to be taught. Without hesitation, he snapped one of Li Bo's arms, ensuring Jie Chang understood the consequences of retaliation. If Jie Chang didn't care about his own well-being, then his friend would suffer in his place. It worked. Jie Chang was furious, but no matter how much rage burned in his eyes, he was powerless to do anything about it. This only made the situation more entertaining for Yan Kai, who was just about to escalate things further. He was confident Instructor Hu wouldn't come to save them, as he had made sure the instructor was occupied beforehand. However, all of Yan Kai's smugness vanished the moment his minion's unconscious body went flying across the field. Shocked to his core, Yan Kai initially thought it was Instructor Hu, but when he turned around, he saw Liang instead. The moment Liang's eyes landed on what had been done to his friend, a furious heat surged through his blood. His aura exploded around him as he made one thing absolutely clear. He was going to knock out every single one of Yan Kai's teeth. Surprisingly, it turned out that Instructor Hu and the sect master had been present the entire time. They had uncovered Yan Kai's scheme early on, but chose not to intervene, seeing it as an ideal opportunity to observe their disciples and uncover their true nature when no one was watching. Despite this, Instructor Hu couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was partly his fault. He believed that if he hadn't been so preoccupied, the entire mess could have been avoided. Earlier that day, after passing the blood step test, he had become overly excited, stopped to celebrate with a drink, and ended up arriving late. Now, because of his delay, things had spiraled out of control. What shocked Instructor Hu the most, however, was Xiao Huai's behavior. He had never expected Xiao Huai to stand by and do nothing while all of this unfolded. Before Instructor Hu could dwell on it further, Master Yang spoke up, clarifying the situation. Having arrived much earlier, Master Yang had witnessed everything and understood why Xiao Huai had frozen. The boy had a good heart, but that was precisely the problem. It had completely immobilized him. This was also the reason Xiao Huai couldn't pass the blood step. A fighter without courage, Master Yang explained, was like a person without breath in their lungs. Now that they had gathered all the necessary information, Instructor Hu suggested they step in and help Liang, especially since he was only on the verge of breaking through the skin barrier. In his current state, there was no way Liang could defeat Yan Kai. However, Master Yang remained still, his eyes fixed on Liang. He noticed that the blood energy coursing through Liang's body was different, fiercer and more intense than anything he had seen from the others. This wasn't just a simple clash. Liang was clearly brewing something within himself. Master Yang decided to let the boy continue. Yan Kai, meanwhile, wasted no time mocking Liang, sneering at what he called a so-called threat. But Liang had no patience for nonsense. What he had issued wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and he had no intention of waiting around. He charged straight at Yan Kai, closing the distance so quickly that even the arrogant fool flinched. Yan Kai hastily barked orders at his goons to handle the situation, but they were no match for Liang. Liang kicked the first attacker aside, dodged a wild punch, and countered with a clean right hook. He then weaved out of the way of a kick from the larger opponent and delivered a punishing blow that knocked the man's teeth out. Liang, however, cared little about these side characters. His real target was Yan Kai, and he was determined to fulfill his promise. Yan Kai, of course, didn't see Liang as a threat. A smug grin played on his lips as he reminded himself that he was at a higher cultivation level than Liang. There was no way, he thought, that some nobody could stand on equal footing with him. The energy dispersing from Liang's body indicated that he was only approaching the skin barrier, a much lesser state than Yan Kai's. That alone should have been enough to scare Liang off, but strangely, it didn't. Not even a little. This threw Yan Kai off balance and he lunged forward, swinging a punch. Leang, however, blocked the punch with ease and retaliated with a kick, followed by a devastating haymaker that sent Yan Kai reeling. Leang didn't stop there. He had made a promise and he was determined to keep it. A brutal uppercut came next, followed by a relentless storm of blows, punches, kicks, and combos that left Yan Kai staggering backward. Each strike chipped away at Yan Kai's false confidence until all that remained was exhaustion. Leang couldn't help but laugh at him. All that talk, only to be beaten down like this. It turned out Yankai wasn't so special after all. This realization snapped Yankai out of his daze. Being beaten was one thing, but being humiliated by a newbie was something he couldn't stomach. In a desperate move, he whipped out a special item and decided to show some generosity by stabbing Leang straight in the stomach multiple times, for good measure. As he did so, he taunted Leang, reminding him of his fatherless status. Unfortunately for Yankai, Leang was built like a tank. Even with multiple wounds, he remained conscious and mobile. When Yankai went for another stab, Leang caught the knife with his bare hand as if it were nothing. Before Yankai could process what had happened, Leang hit him with another vicious haymaker, sending Yankai's head crashing into the ground with enough force to nearly cave it in. Just like that, the arrogant fool was reduced to a crying mess, scrambling for help. He turned to Xiaohui, desperately pleading for intervention and babbling about sect rules that prohibited disciples from attacking each other in such a manner. This was ironic, coming from someone who had just done the same thing moments earlier. Xiaohui seemed to consider stepping in, likely out of concern for his father's safety. But before he could act, Master Yang decided he had seen enough. Master Yang sent his sword flying into the ground, and his commanding voice cut through the tension as he ordered everyone to stop. With the fight halted, he wasted no time declaring that the 6 individuals involved, including Yankai, were to be exiled from the sect and never allowed to set foot in the martial hall again. As for Xiaohui, he was to be sent to the confinement room until Master Yang dealt with him personally. Judging by Xiaohui's expression, he understood exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, Leang sat frozen. In front of him stood the legendary young Dong Shong. After everything that had just happened, the sheer rage he had unleashed, Leang felt certain that this was the end of his journey in the sect. He had gone too far, done too much. So when Master Yang called his name, Leang bowed his head, expecting the worst. He was ready to be exiled, but to his astonishment, Master Yang was anything but angry. In fact, he was impressed. Instead of punishment, he offered Leang something he never saw coming: a place as his direct disciple. Leang was shocked. For a moment he thought he had misheard. The backing he so desperately needed, the security he had been scrambling for, had come to him on its own, and not just as any disciple, but as Master Yang's direct disciple. Never in his wildest dreams had he expected this, but it was a welcome surprise indeed. With this, his future in the sect was secure. A few days had passed, and the Yang residence was abuzz with excitement. Rumors had spread that Master Yang had accepted his 9th direct disciple, a handsome young man, no less. Upon hearing this news, the girls in the residence wasted no time. They flocked to his room, bringing him new outfits to try on. Some even boldly offered to help him put them on. However, Leang, not one for such boldness, politely declined. Their laughter as they left suggested they had merely been teasing him, and while the encounter was a bit of a hassle for Leang, he found it worth enduring. 2 weeks had passed since Leang had defeated Yankai. Thanks to the medicinal baths provided by the sect, the wounds on his body, as well as those of his friends, had nearly healed. Leang was deeply grateful, not just for the physical healing, but for the sense of belonging it symbolized. He was no longer alone. He had a master, senior brothers and sisters, and a support system. Now it was time to prepare for a counterattack against those from the Xiao Manor. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Yang residence, Senior Hu was practically glowing with excitement as he recounted Liang's story. He spoke at length about how impressive the newcomer was, emphasizing that Leang had defeated someone on the verge of breaking through the skin barrier just a day after joining the sect. By now, however, the others had heard the story so many times that they were growing tired of it. They already knew Leang was exceptional. After all, Master Yang had chosen him at first glance. Zhou Qiqin, the only woman among the direct disciples, easily detected the jealousy hidden in their conversation and called them out on it. To his credit, the fourth disciple didn't even bother denying it. Still, as a senior, it was tradition to gift something to a new junior, and Leang was no exception. Despite his own financial struggles, the fourth disciple managed to gift Leang a piece of tungsten steel arm guard. It wasn't much, but considering his circumstances, it was the best he could do, and honestly, it was more than enough. As if on cue, Leang arrived, sporting a fresh new outfit for the occasion, complete with a new hairstyle. He looked clean and sharp, drawing everyone's attention. Despite the admiration, Leang made sure to greet his seniors with proper respect, which they appreciated. Before they could head to the ceremony, however, the third senior brother realized he hadn't yet given his gift. Seizing the moment, he presented Leang with a fine piece of exquisite crane gold, an incredibly valuable material for crafting weapons. Not only that, he even offered to forge Leang a weapon himself if he ever stopped by his smithy. Leang, of course, expressed his deep gratitude. With the formalities concluded, it was time to head to the ceremony. They couldn't afford to keep their master and mistress waiting. Meanwhile, over at the Xiao Manor, the atmosphere was far grimmer. The steward had arrived bearing bad news. Old man Zhang's corpse had been found, but the item that was supposed to be inside his stomach had vanished. This was the last thing Xiao wanted to hear. He didn't even let the steward finish before slapping him in a fit of rage. The situation was dire. If that item were exposed, it would cause serious trouble. If the government caught wind of it, Xiao's head would be served on a platter as compensation, a fate the steward certainly didn't want. Desperate to shift the blame, the steward pointed the finger at Leang, arguing that since old man Zhang had been sent after Leang and was now dead, it was obvious Leang had killed him and let the item escape. This earned the steward another slap. Xiao was no fool. He had already received news that Leang was now a direct disciple of Yang Dongxiang. If the steward was so eager to test Yang's blade, he was welcome to try, though the steward had no desire to do so. Xiao ordered him to forget about assigning blame and focus on retrieving the missing item immediately. As the steward left, Xiao's anger only deepened. Liang had struck a nerve, and even though he was now under the protection of the Yang sect, Xiao couldn't help but plot ways to get his hands on him. Back at the Yang residence, Liang stood before Master Yang as the ceremony to formally accept him as a disciple began. It started with a simple question, to which Liang gave a firm and resolute acceptance. Master Yang made it clear that being his disciple would not be an easy path. Joining meant staying humble, diligent, and respectful to both the masters and the teachings. Liang was forbidden from fighting among his peers, disrespecting his elders, or committing evil acts. Liang understood all of this and responded with unwavering determination, which delighted the master. With a nod of approval, Master Yang officially declared Liang his 9th direct disciple. He emphasized that under his watch, no one would be able to humiliate or intimidate Liang, as Yang Dongxiang himself would stand behind him. Liang accepted this declaration with grace. Not long after, news of Liang's newfound status spread throughout the academy, stirring envy among many. However, any jealousy that arose was quickly overshadowed by the far more satisfying revelation that Yan Kai and his gang had been expelled from the school. Yet one person did not take the news lightly: Xiao Yuan. Upon hearing Liang's name, Xiao Yuan cursed under his breath, seething with resentment. While all of this unfolded, Liang was simply minding his own business, continuing his lessons with Senior Hu. That day, their discussion built upon their previous conversation about the 4 barriers, shifting focus to the 7 paths. Senior Hu explained each realm in detail. In the wild horse realm, a warrior at their peak could restrain dozens of galloping horses without budging. In the wolf smoke realm, blood energy surged like thick black smoke, rising several meters high when fully unleashed, striking fear into those nearby, much like a pack of wolves. In the tiger hunt realm, blood energy boiled like a raging tide, radiating such terrifying force that ordinary people would tremble, feeling as helpless as a rabbit caught in the gaze of a hungry tiger. In the supreme elephant realm, every step could shake the ground. Those who reached this level were said to be capable of collapsing mountains and halting rivers, making them prime candidates to become great generals. In the celestial dragon realm, one transcended ordinary limitations, becoming akin to a divine dragon. Such individuals could leap 3,000 jang in a single bound, soaring among the clouds, and were revered as martial saints of a nation. As for the melting furnace realm and rainbow transformation realm, even Senior Hu admitted that little was known. All he could say was that experts who reached these stages had supposedly ascended beyond mortality itself. This last detail immediately caught Leang's attention. If martial cultivation in this world was truly that powerful, did ascension mean one could return to their previous world? It was an intriguing thought, but he pushed it aside for the moment, not wanting Senior Hu to catch him slacking. Quickly, he asked what level their master had reached. The question brought a chuckle from Senior Hu, who was more than happy to boast about their master's strength. He explained that despite there being 3 martial schools in Pinyang City, the Yang sect remained the most revered. Unlike the other 2 schools, which were confined to Pinyang due to their limited capabilities, Master Yang stayed by choice. Pinyang was his hometown. His martial arts school had been the #1 for years for one simple reason. Master Yang was the only one in Pinyang to have reached the tiger hunt realm. As one might expect, Leang was both surprised and excited by this revelation. With his system, he believed he could reach that level even faster. His excitement was evident on his face, so much so that Senior Hu had to caution him, advising him not to rush. Advancements, he stressed, had to be made step by step, with patience and control. But of course, Leang wasn't exactly listening. His mind was already racing, thinking about the spiritual fish he needed to capture to break through the first barrier and officially become a martial master. With that goal in mind, he wasted no time. The next moment, he was out on the lake, attempting to catch a spirit fish with the help of his pets. Fishing itself was easy, but for some reason he couldn't seem to find what he was looking for. No matter how many fish he caught, they were all just regular fish. His boat was nearly overflowing with them, making him wonder if he needed a bigger vessel. Yet, even after some time had passed, his luck refused to turn around. Not a single spirit fish was in sight. With his synchronization rate already at 37%, he knew that catching just one could help him break through to the skin barrier. However, his train of thought was suddenly interrupted when he noticed a single red feather fluttering in the wind. As his gaze followed it, the atmosphere shifted. The once calm lake grew restless, with unseen currents stirring beneath the surface. Then, without warning, waves surged and crashed violently against his boat. This took Leang by surprise, as such a disturbance had never happened before. He immediately began looking around for answers and quickly realized the source of the chaos. 2 giant spirit beasts were locked in combat. A primordial toad had set its sights on a vermilion bird, clearly attempting to turn the majestic creature into its next meal. But the bird had no intention of being eaten. With a furious flap of its wings, it retaliated, sending the massive toad hurtling back into the lake. The impact was so powerful that it created a massive wave, one large enough to shatter Leang's boat into pieces. Thrown into the water, he barely had time to react before the vermilion bird unleashed its next attack, a mental strike that hit him instantly. His vision blurred, his thoughts scrambled, and before he could even resist, his consciousness completely blacked out. Some time later, Leang woke up on solid ground. At first he was confused, but as he groggily took in his surroundings, he quickly realized what had happened. His pets had saved him yet again, pulling him away from the battlefield before things could get worse. Even so, his mind was still reeling from what he had just witnessed. Those spirit beasts were on a completely different level. Just from their battle alone, the entire weather had shifted. A full-blown tornado now raged in the middle of the lake, created by the sheer force of their clash. If a primordial toad was capable of catching a beast that could create such a vortex, then capturing one himself would be an entirely different challenge. That thought alone made him feel ridiculously small. But that was a concern for the distant future. For now, he still hadn't caught the one fish he actually needed. To make things worse, his boat was destroyed, and all the fish he had caught so far were gone. His progress was completely delayed, which was frustrating to say the least. With a heavy sigh, he decided to take a break before his irritation got the best of him. Just as he was about to resign himself to his bad luck, something unexpected happened. His lazy crocodile, who was usually too sluggish to be of any use, had actually come through when it mattered most. While Leang had been knocked out, it had somehow managed to catch a spirit fish. And just like that, things weren't so bad after all. With this, he could finally break through the skin barrier and grow stronger. Leang went straight to his house and immediately began cultivating blood energy. Blood energy, he reflected, was a manifestation of a martial artist's physical strength. However, possessing strong blood energy alone did not equate to power. Rather, it was because their physical constitution was robust enough that they could condense sufficient blood energy. Blood energy was not the cause of strength, but the result. Yet, this result, in turn, reinforced the cause, creating a positive cycle that grew endlessly. With Senior Hu's guidance and the resources provided, Leang felt confident in his ability to progress. This confidence was further bolstered after he received a concentration incense, a rare aid that helped martial artists break through their gates more easily. The key to breaking through the Pi Gate and becoming a martial artist lay in tempering the blood energy in the chest. Each time Leang trained his blood energy, he replenished it with fish meat. Despite this, after 38 attempts, he still felt he was just a little short of achieving his goal. It was then that he recalled another piece of advice from Senior Hu. Another key to breaking through the Pi Gate was to use qi and blood inner force to stimulate the body's fascia and skin, achieving the effect of skin refinement. Qi and blood referred to the energy one felt in their chest when practicing martial arts. It was the essence condensed by the human body, the very root of life. When a martial artist could sense a warm current flowing from their chest, merging with their blood energy, this qi would begin to move. It would spread toward the limbs and bones, and finally, when it reached the fascia and skin, it would transform into a surge of heat. That was skin refinement. Indeed, Leang could feel that he was close, but unfortunately, it still wasn't enough. This was already his 40th attempt, and he was still a little short. Frustrated, he turned to his system for answers. There, he noticed that his synchronization was only at 49%. It seemed logical to assume that once he hit 50%, something major would change within him, allowing him to finally reach the next stage of his cultivation. However, raising his synchronization now was easier said than done. The fish meat he had stored was already gone, and the lotus roots barely had any effect on him anymore. It appeared he had no choice but to head back down and catch another mystic fish. To his surprise, Leang had taken much longer than expected, and by the time he realized it, morning had already arrived. Before he could even get out of bed, someone was knocking on his door. It turned out to be Gia Chang and Libo's fathers. Since they had seen him come home late the night before, they wanted to ask if he had seen their sons. Apparently, the two hadn't been home for 2 days, and their parents were starting to get worried. They weren't sure if their kids were still at the Martial Hall or if they had wandered off somewhere, messing around again. Leang reassured them, explaining that there was no need to worry. The three of them had performed well and caught the attention of the martial instructors, who had specifically set aside a room for them in the courtyard. As a result, they had been staying there, focusing on their training. As one might expect, their fathers were both delighted and proud. It truly sounded like their sons, and it seemed like Yixing City had produced a few martial artists after all. This wasn't much of a surprise, as everyone had watched these kids grow up together and had always known they would achieve something big one day. Liang kept his smile on but didn't reveal the whole truth. The real reason Jichang and Libo hadn't returned with him was that they were too scared to go back. Their injuries hadn't fully healed yet, and they didn't want their parents to worry for nothing. With that matter settled, the uncles revealed another reason for their visit. They had come to remind Leang that the village was organizing another river god sacrificial ceremony. This caught Liang by surprise. He definitely remembered this custom, but they had already held one just 3 months ago. Normally, the next ceremony shouldn't have been for another year. However, this time was different. According to the villagers, the river god had shown a divine sign the previous day. The river god had leaped out of the water and caught a flaming giant bird that had shattered the sky. The moment Liang heard this, he immediately realized what they were talking about: the river-eating toad. He had seen it, and it truly had been an epic sight. Instead of refuting their claims, he simply promised to contribute some money and take part when the time came. This was all the uncles needed to hear, as they were already running low on offerings and needed all the help they could get. Satisfied, they left. A little while later, Liang continued his training inside the Lotus Cave, going all out against his two beasts. Previously, he could barely win against just one, but now he was fighting both at once, effortlessly maneuvering through the water. This improvement was thanks to the increase in his fusion level. Moreover, the force of the water flow he could control was approximately 150 kilo, which could be compressed into 10 liters of water to be unleashed. This meant each liter was equivalent to 15 kilos of force. At this point, his strength underwater had already surpassed the pi gate. If he had to guess, he could probably take on 4 Yankai with ease. With this level of control, he could even form a water blade inside the water itself. However, it was still a work in progress, as it wasn't strong enough to do anything to his pets yet. If only he had a weapon suited for it, then it would definitely become a formidable technique. Speaking of weapons, Liang suddenly remembered what his third senior brother had mentioned. This world had a special kind of weapon called a spirit weapon. These weapons could self-repair and even level up over time. However, forging one wasn't easy. Their cores required rare heavenly materials and earthly treasures, making it almost impossible for him to acquire one right now, or so he thought. Just then, his pet Chunky sensed something hot, even in the water below. Without hesitation, Liang turned to investigate, following Chunky's lead. Soon, he discovered an item buried beneath the rubble, still bubbling with energy. To his surprise, it was a feather, the very same vermilion bird feather from the other day. Just from its aura alone, it was obvious this wasn't ordinary. It looked special, and this might just be the very thing he had been looking for. Since Leang was already planning to visit his third senior brother to select a weapon, he decided to bring the feather along and inquire about it as well. A short while later, Leang arrived at Pingyang County. As usual, the area was vibrant and bustling with activity. However, before he could reach his brother's smithy, something unusual caught his attention. A thick column of black smoke rising in the distance. It appeared to be coming from somewhere near Pingyang County. This was not a common sight, so Liang made a mental note to ask his brother about it later. Upon arriving at the smithy, however, Liang completely forgot about the smoke, as the item he carried was far more important. Just as he had anticipated, his brother immediately recognized it. The feather was a real treasure known as the Crimson Fire Molt Feather. His brother was so impressed by the find that he didn't hesitate to congratulate Liang. This feather was no ordinary material. It originated from the crimson firebird, a rare spirit creature. When faced with a life-threatening danger, the firebird would inject all of its life essence into a single feather before scattering its plumage in all directions, allowing it to escape. Among these feathers, one would always contain the most life essence, known as the scarlet fire gold feather. Using this feather, the bird could undergo rebirth, similar to how a lizard sheds its tail. Except in this case, the firebird would abandon its entire body. Ling's eyes sparkled with excitement upon hearing this news. However, just as he was about to celebrate, his senior brother clarified that what Leang had found was not the legendary golden feather, but merely a remnant. Though it was still a great discovery, this clarification instantly deflated Liang's enthusiasm. His brother had initially hyped him up, only to reveal that the feather was not as extraordinary as he had thought. Nevertheless, Liang wasn't overly disappointed. The feather could still be used to forge a spiritual weapon, which was exactly what he needed at the moment. Reflecting on his recent battle with the stone crab, Liang had already decided on the type of weapon he wanted: a polearm. He believed it would work best underwater and complement his self-created techniques. Without hesitation, he confidently chose a spear. This decision surprised his senior brother, as spears were quite rare in their school. While longer weapons offered the advantage of reach, they were also harder to control. Despite this, Liang remained firm in his choice. He knew exactly what he needed, and his unique fighting style demanded something unconventional. Seeing his resolve, his senior brother didn't question him further and agreed to forge the spear. Leang was grateful for his brother's assistance, though he understood that crafting a weapon wasn't an instant process. He would have to wait a few days for it to be completed. Just before leaving, however, something caught his eye again, the same ominous column of thick smoke rising in the distance. Instinctively, he turned to his brother and asked about it. The mood shifted instantly. His brother's face darkened, and his anger boiled over to the point where he cracked the table he was holding. The smoke, he explained, was coming from Fawa Temple. A massive fire had broken out that morning, and amidst the flames, something terrifying had emerged, a mountain demon straight out of a nightmare. Hours before the chaos unfolded, on the outskirts of Fawa Temple, a woman was seen running frantically toward the temple. Her tattered clothes and bruised body made it evident that she had endured unimaginable suffering. Despite her advanced pregnancy, she pressed on, driven by sheer fear. The moment she spotted someone and attempted to cry for help, her body gave out, and she collapsed on the spot. Fortunately, her desperate efforts were not in vain, as the people at the temple took her in and cared for her. However, when she regained consciousness, it was clear they demanded answers. How had she ended up in such a dire state? Out of gratitude, the woman explained her ordeal. She revealed that she was originally from Huazhu County. 3 months prior, she had traveled to Pingyang County to visit her relatives. However, her journey took a horrific turn when she encountered a group of sinister-looking bandits. They blindfolded her and dragged her to an unknown location, a place she described as nothing short of hell. The people there had been tortured and broken, stripped of their humanity and transformed into something unrecognizable. She lamented that being kidnapped for ransom would have been preferable to the fate she endured. Instead, the bandits sought something far more sinister. They intended to refine her into a pill. Meanwhile, in the very hellhole she described, a ritual was underway. A large group of robed figures focused their energy on runes carved into the body of a sacrificial victim, causing the victim's body to swell grotesquely. Once enough energy had been gathered, a man referred to as the Great Superior stepped forward, wielding a horrifying knife. He plunged the blade into the victim, and from the gruesome act emerged the very thing they sought, a twisted, monstrous pill. This abomination, a fusion of pure evil and the flesh of the sacrifice, was something only a mind steeped in insanity could conceive. Even some of the newer followers began to question what they were witnessing, their confusion palpable. Who could blame them? One of the senior members took it upon himself to explain the ritual, his tone carrying a mix of reverence and horror. He revealed that this was a forbidden pill known as the fetal pearl pill. The sacrificial victim was first forced to consume a broth brewed from the flesh of a mountain spirit. It didn't matter whether the victim was male or female. Once they drank the broth, their belly would swell, nurturing a grotesque mass of flesh inside them. After 3 months, this mass would mature into a fetal pill, which could then be harvested and refined into a fetal pearl pill. It was said that consuming such a pill would grant immortality. However, if the mass was not extracted within the 3-month period, it would hatch, and what emerged from it was something even the most seasoned members of the group refused to imagine. Back at Fahua Temple, the older monk had gone to the city to inform the authorities about the woman's harrowing story. In his absence, the younger monk was tasked with bringing her food. As he entered the room, an eerie silence hung in the air. He noticed the woman's silhouette lying on the bed and assumed she had fallen asleep, which seemed reasonable given her ordeal. He was about to set the food down on the table when he suddenly stepped into something sticky. At first, he was confused, but the sharp metallic scent that filled his nose soon made it clear. It was blood, and it was fresh. When he turned toward the source, he froze in terror. All that remained of the woman was her lower half. His instincts screamed at him to flee, but his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Desperate to make sense of the scene, he turned his gaze back to the bed, only to find the woman's lifeless upper half lying there. Just as he was about to run, another drop of blood splattered onto his head. Confused, he looked up, and immediately wished he hadn't. Perched above him was the ugliest, most horrifying creature he had ever seen. It was a monstrous baby. The little monk had returned from the city with 2 officers and a cultivator from the Yang sect, the same senior who had previously tried and failed to stop Yan Kai from beating up Libo and Ji Chang. Thanks to Yan Kai's connections with the Jiao Manor, the senior Lu Xiaohui had been unable to intervene. The officers were more than relieved to have him there. It was far better than calling in someone higher up. However, Lu Xiaohui hesitated, not out of humility, but because something about the situation unsettled him. In truth, he hadn't come out of goodwill. He had been personally ordered by the steward of the Jiao Manor to recover bodies and retrieve certain items. Though he hadn't been given details, he knew better than to expect anything good. This was dangerous, and he was well aware of it. Yet he had taken the job anyway. Before he could dwell further, his thoughts were cut short as they approached the temple. The atmosphere felt off, eerily different from what they had expected. It wasn't just unsettling, it was ominous as hell. The moment they pushed open the gates, they froze, mouths agape. Countless monks lay lifeless near the entrance, their bodies sprawled across the ground as if they had been trying to flee, only to be caught right at the gates. As expected, the little monk's first concern was his master's well-being. Without hesitation, he rushed deeper into the temple. One officer followed immediately, while the other stayed behind with Lu Xiaohui to investigate. Most of the corpses bore jagged, deep bite marks, as if left by some enormous insect. But an insect of that size shouldn't exist. Worse, not a single body was left intact. Whatever had done this wasn't just a predator, it was something wicked. Lu Xiaohui cursed the steward under his breath. This wasn't what he had been told. The steward had mentioned only a few victims. But this was a massacre. Before he could process it further, the officer beside him noticed something. A prominent blood stain smeared across the floor. Judging by the trail, the bodies had been dragged to one particular place. The realization sent a chill through them. Without a word, they followed the trail, leading them straight to where the little monk and the other officer had gone. The moment they stepped inside, their breath caught in their throats. Their expressions mirrored the little monk's horror. Before them lay a waking nightmare. The corpses had been piled and woven together, twisted and fused into a grotesque nest. And sitting atop that macabre structure was something even worse, an enormous egg, but not of any natural kind. It was made of flesh, a pulsating, blood-slicked mass of tangled muscle and sinew, contorted in ways that defied nature. It was something no sane mind could have imagined, even in their worst nightmares. Before they could process it, the door behind them slammed shut. The nearest officer reacted instantly, throwing his weight against it. But no matter how hard he pushed, it wouldn't budge. It was as if something or someone was holding it shut from the outside. He shouted, demanding whoever was out there to open the damn door. But Lu Xiaohui barely spared the door a glance. He told the officer to stop worrying about it and focus on what truly mattered. The egg. Because it was about to hatch, and whatever came out of it wasn't something they could afford to underestimate. These were mountain demon eggs, the mark of the Mother Phantom sect. That revelation alone sent a shiver down the officer's spine. That sect should have died with the remnants of the ancient dynasty. And yet, here was proof that something far worse had survived. It was said that when a mountain demon hatched and absorbed enough blood and flesh, it would prepare for its second phase. By the looks of it, the nest was ready. The egg wasn't just hatching, it was evolving. What would emerge would already be at the unbridled stallion stage, something that could tear through them without effort. As if on cue, the thing they dreaded finally happened. The ugliest motherfucker imaginable clawed its way out of the egg, dripping with blood and something far more vile. Its limbs were freakishly long, granting it unnatural speed. Before anyone could react, it closed the distance in an instant. Its first victim didn't even get the chance to scream. The remaining fighter's instincts surged into overdrive, but instead of running, the youngest among them chose to fight. His senior barely had time to react, reaching out to stop him. Charging in was beyond reckless, but it was too late. The monster shifted its focus to the young fool who had dared to stand against it. With terrifying ease, it caught him, sending his senior stumbling back. At that moment, the young officer realized just how close he was to death. Desperation surged through him, and he cried out for Lu Xiaohui to help, but Lu Xiaohui didn't move. His mind raced, calculating the situation. The truth was clear. He didn't stand a chance. A man who hadn't even broken through the 4 barriers was nothing against a creature at the stallion stage. The logical choice was to retreat. Survival was what mattered. That was what he had always believed. And yet, he felt disgusted. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to live, to fight another day, to take the safest path as he always had. That was why he had survived this long. He had always been adaptable, always picked the route with the best outcome. But this, leaving now, meant this monster would roam free, and that he couldn't allow. His past self wouldn't forgive him for that. Because before he became a man of intellect and logic, he had been a child with a pure heart and an unshakable dream. He had once shouted to the world that he would become a great hero, like Master Yang, someone whose name would be renowned across the lands. Back then, the other kids had looked up to him for it. Of course, he had taken pride in that. So even when he found himself outclassed, he never backed down, not even against the young master of the Jiao Manor. He had fought, despite taking a serious beating, but when he saw how his injuries made his father worry, something in him changed. He didn't want to be a burden just because of his pride. His father, however, wasn't the type to miss such a shift. He reminded his son that no matter what happened, he had to become someone he himself could respect, and that had stuck with him. So now, gripping his blade, Lu Xiaohui steeled himself to fight, to test just how powerful a stallion stage monster truly was. This was exactly why he had become a disciple of the Yang sect. Master Yang had seen something in him, and now was his chance to prove it. He charged forward, striking, but the monster dodged effortlessly, already preparing to counterattack. Lu Xiaohui was ready. He met the creature's assault head-on, their blades clashing. At that moment, memories of Master Yang's stories resurfaced. Tales of standing firm in the face of adversity, of his blade gleaming brilliantly as he swung it, flashes of steel cutting through darkness like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Even when heavily wounded and exhausted, Master Yang had never once considered stopping. If his master could fight to the bitter end, then why should he, his disciple, be any less? So even as his dominant arm was severed, he didn't waver. Instead, he shifted his grip, driving his blade deep into the monster, pinning it to the ground, just as he had planned from the beginning. The fire from the candles he had struck earlier had already begun to spread. He had never intended to defeat the beast through brute strength alone. He was too weak for that. Fire was his only chance. And for the flames to consume it completely, he had to keep it pinned down, even if it meant dying alongside it. He apologized to the young officer for involving him. There had been no other choice. He had to see this plan through no matter the cost. But the officer understood. After all, the reason he had become an officer in the first place was to do what was right. And this was undoubtedly one of those moments. He would never blame Lu Xiaohui for his decision. To his eyes, Lu Xiaohui was already a hero. That made Lu Xiaohui chuckle a little. He had always known there were people far more heroic than he was. His mind drifted back to a childhood memory, one that had shaped him more than he cared to admit. He had been just a boy when the third young master put him in a difficult position, break another child's teeth, or have his own shattered. It had seemed like a test of loyalty, but to him, it was never about fitting in. He had never cared for that. What he wanted was strength, a way to never feel powerless again. Obeying the young master's orders could have been his chance to grow strong, like the heroes in the stories he admired. So he had wrestled with the choice. Gain power at any cost, or become someone he could be proud of. It had been a harsh decision for someone so young, but when it truly mattered, he had always chosen the latter. He had stayed true to himself, not just as a man he could respect, but as someone others could look up to, because in the end, he was a hero. And heroes always did what was right, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. The scene shifts back to the guy who set everything up. Right here, he ended up receiving a scolding from his old superior, Xiao Manor, who told him that what he had done was completely wrong, since his actions would basically lead to the destruction of his family. However, to save himself, he ends up saying that they did everything they could to protect their secret. Still, they hadn't expected that woman to run so fast. Moreover, she ran straight to that temple. To make matters worse, by the time they reached the temple, they found something quite interesting. The place was completely destroyed. Additionally, there were two men there who would be extremely difficult to defeat. And on top of that, he had no choice but to leave El Shangu and the authorities behind to stall for time while they dealt with those mountain demons. As soon as he entered that mansion, they set it on fire, as it would be easier to burn all the evidence inside. However, Xiao Manor was furious at his actions and was about to scold him again. But just then, someone appeared and asked him to stop arguing, saying that the real culprits behind this foolishness were the two of them. They had lost that woman, which was a huge disaster for them. To make matters worse, the Supreme Mother realized that their actions were insincere. Deception is something they despise, and she clearly enjoys punishing people like that. With a more serious expression, he raised his hand and moved toward the subordinate who was lying on the ground, sweating and terrified, begging for mercy, but it was useless. He crushed him. While doing so, he declared that this was the will of the Supreme Mother. However, whether he liked it or not, he had caused a great disturbance among them. The Supreme Mother, therefore, would bless him in the end, after his death. Meanwhile, he told him not to feel too happy about it, because they were all in the same boat. He understood all of this, and began cleaning up the mess that had been made. While he was doing so, Butler Zheng asked if he was really willing to abandon his children. He said he was fine with it, and that it would never happen again. Regardless, he had nothing left to do there now. He would be leaving everything in the hands of that master. The other man agreed, and then he left. As soon as he walked away, we see another servant commenting that the butler from earlier was basically threatening him. He said that wasn't good. However, on the other hand, he admitted the same thing. If not for his family's wealth, he would never have to listen to that old man. But thanks to him, he had managed to accomplish something quite significant. He had eliminated a large portion of those monks and ensured that the monster that came from that woman was feeding on those men. Everything was going exactly as they had planned. Now that everything was going perfectly, he only needed to find a way to escape from any potential complications. Once the situation at the Fan Huan Temple was resolved, he would be able to flee to the Huang Temple. He had a base in that territory and could live there for a long time, possibly even achieving immortality. To make things even better, he could live a peaceful life without Yang interfering in his personal affairs. Moreover, if they didn't want to be controlled by Dan, they would have to minimize the damage caused before. That was the best path to follow. While he was saying this, our scene shifted to another location. Leang reflected that he had never expected Lucha's story to end this way. However, according to Libo, he was one of the people who fought for his life that day. He seemed like a decent person. Yet according to his older brother, the school had never received any official requests from the authorities about that day. But he also wondered why, especially in relation to the Fan Huan Temple. Knowing it was all a scheme by some individuals, he realized that this world was truly cruel. Even so, he simply thought that maybe that monster outside had already been exterminated, until someone called out to him. He wondered if he was really back, and when he saw who was calling him, he recognized him as Uncle Shen. He started wondering what was going on. Uncle Shen told him that he should go home, as he needed to see something with his own eyes. There was a large crowd gathered at the entrance of his house. Hearing this, he simply walked toward the front door. As he walked, the mountain trembled beneath him, and he observed the entire scene below. But suddenly, a mysterious hand appeared and crushed a centipede. Meanwhile, someone was calling for immortality, while another was calling for Liang. The monster that crushed the centipede merely grabbed it and devoured it. As this happened, the scene transitioned to yet another location. Someone remarked that, according to the great men who had lived in this world, this was essentially the dilemma. In order to become stronger, one must undergo immense suffering and sadness. The greater the suffering, the greater the strength. While discussing this, we heard some noises. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to another location where someone else is saying the exact same thing. As he spoke about suffering being the foundation of everything, something essential to becoming a good boy in the future, the boy beneath him did not quite agree. After all, he was pleading for it to stop, as he had already been there for half an hour, receiving some kind of punishment for some reason. Moreover, those slaps. However, on the other hand, the man said the opposite. He was the boy's father, and besides, he was quite smart. How could he possibly be more foolish than his own son? Just before he could continue hitting him, the boy, Raintal, asked his father if he would really go on, questioning whether all this beating would actually make him stop. The father became increasingly irritated with his son, deciding now to beat him to death. While that boy was getting just a little beaten up, we cut to another location. A woman comments that the boy really came all the way here, but she also didn't know that this guy would develop so much in the past. That boy always knocked on her door asking for food, and out of kindness, she ended up lending him just a single grain of rice. That left her quite surprised. Hulk, however, was left wondering what she had just said. The next moment he gets irritated because she is an ungrateful woman. She doesn't know how hard it was to recover that grain she had lent to Liang. To make matters worse, her father had a short life expectancy. Upon hearing all of this, she simply asked him to calm down, but now he changed the subject, telling her to stop because Clip Rally was already arriving. As it arrived, we then found that same guy from before still beating his son. He commented that he would make him the strongest in Moran no matter what. However, Leang wondered what was going on. After all, this was happening right at the door of his house. At the moment when they finally encountered Leang, old Tunata stopped hitting the boy. Once he stopped, he got up and only then walked toward Leang, pressing his palms together. He was quite surprised that his nephew Leang had just returned. Now, with a rat-like face, He commented that Leang was truly the most powerful person in this life. After all, he had managed to balance everything to the point of personally becoming one of Master Yang's personal disciples. Upon hearing this, another person asked, "Master Yang? Master Yang from the martial school?" He was a renowned man, known as a great hero. A personal disciple? This meant that he had truly bowed and acknowledged him as a master. Half son, half father. Wade then joined the martial school, and Yang as well. Even the county magistrate had to show respect to the old Master Yang. This left the other onlookers completely stunned. After all, if the county magistrate had to bow to someone like him, that meant something significant. They then felt proud but quickly changed the subject. They commented that our hero would be more than welcome here. At the same time, they started wondering how old he was. Another person, with an even more rat-like face, commented that she knew from the beginning that Leang had immense potential. However, everything was interrupted when someone started saying that his son had done something so disgraceful to their family. He then approached Leang, and now that he was close, he gave Leang the honor of beating his son nearly to death. He could do it. He could do whatever he wanted because no one would stop him. At that moment, hearing this, he became interested. Since he was allowed to do it, he grabbed a rod and approached. As he got closer, he said he held no grudges, but a man couldn't live holding on to too much resentment for too long. And to make matters worse, he also wanted to live a long life. Knowing that Leang was about to start beating him, the man regretted what he had done and admitted his mistakes. In the heat of the moment, he declared that he would become Leang's servant. No, not a servant. "You're my little horse," Leang corrected him. The man only asked for one thing, to be spared after this humiliation. In response, Leang took the staff and threw it away, saying he would leave it for another time, or perhaps never. At that moment, he went far, perhaps too far. He had other things to do now. However, as he was about to leave, he was interrupted by some men who were still tied up. He became angry at his father because he still wanted to beat him more. However, his own father approached and told his nephew Leang that he was not so generous but also should not be ungrateful. So, to avoid being too ungrateful, he would offer him 2,000 yuan silver coins. The moment he mentioned this, everyone was shocked. After all, he was offering our hero 2,000 yuan silver coins, leaving everyone completely astonished. He found so many coins in life, and also that a guy didn't find them? It was the same one from before, the one who either gave or wanted to refuse some things to Leang. He comments that everyone should leave since Leang was one of his true nephews, so the gift should be given to him right there. And as soon as everyone sees it, they start pointing out some things about him. He even tells him to be ashamed because when Wade was practically starving, he was the first to shut the doors on him. That was exactly how it was. And now that he's making the best money, he's showing up in front of everyone, trying to take the money for himself. At that moment, he turns to his nephew and asks himself, "Who is this guy?" Leang, on the other hand, responds that he doesn't know. In the benefactor's memory, this was the ungrateful uncle who was never really family, just a leech who took advantage of others. And even if he insisted on doing something, nothing would change in that village. It was basically the festival of the river god. So he offers that guy one of those with plenty of coins to pay off all the debts. After all, he has a lot of money, and everyone in the village must be making an effort to pay at least one silver coin. And since he was already thinking about it, he asks for a porridge stall to be set up somewhere because in a few days, there will be plenty of beggars wandering around that village. Then he turns and heads toward his house, and everyone behind him starts praising Leang. Now that it's all over, we see him commenting that the last time at the martial arts school, he practiced some skin refinements. But at that moment, he felt that his skin had reached its limit. It was no longer stretching as before, but rather swelling. If he wasn't mistaken, he should be able to break through the skin portal today. But one thing was certain. The final breakthrough would generate much more heat than before. A single misstep he could take at that moment would end up frying his brain. To avoid that, he should use some physical cooling methods. Now he could finally advance in his cultivation. After sitting there, he finally began his cultivation. After a while, what he had longed for, breaking through the skin barrier, finally happened. Once it did, He stood up, clenched his fists, and felt a surge of happiness. He had finally succeeded in breaking the skin barrier. Now, roughly estimating, he had gained the ability to control water with a capacity of about 150 kilometers, a surprising improvement. However, his fusion with the system didn't seem to have progressed much. Ignoring the negative effects, he dressed himself, still amazed by the power of the skin barrier. With this breakthrough, he could now surpass a strength of perhaps 4 tons. Finally, his abilities were complete. With his newfound strength method, he could achieve twice the results. Though for him, this was no longer satisfactory. Just as he considered moving to another place, he opened the door, only to slam it directly into someone's face. The impact sent the person tumbling to the ground. Lying there, the man wondered if this wasn't his beloved nephew. Leang immediately recognized him as Liang Guangtian. Since he was here, Liang questioned what he wanted. The man stood up and suggested that maybe Liang was hungry, offering him a small portion of food. Before he could finish speaking, Liang refused. Moreover, it seemed the man intended to keep the food for himself. In this world, rice was a valuable commodity. Liang turned and closed the door, but the man asked him to wait. Unintentionally, Liang pushed the door back open to hear him out, only for it to hit the man in the face again, knocking him to the floor once more. This time, red liquid trickled from his nose. The man shouted that he was Liang's uncle and, by blood, had rights to the house. He demanded to know why Liang hadn't accepted the large sum of money offered by that big man. He began calling Liang crazy, screaming like a madman, while a small crowd gathered behind him. The scene shifted back to the man, who ranted that Liang should have used that money to support himself, his cousin, and even him. After all, as the eldest, he was practically a father figure to Liang. But these threats only made Liang feel uneasy. Liang called out to him coldly, asking if he had a death wish. "All you have to do is take one step forward," Liang warned. The man flinched. In just minutes, Liang seemed to have grown more intimidating. The man, who once saw Liang as inferior, now cowered on the ground, pointing at him and calling him an ungrateful brat. "After becoming a martial arts master, you're no longer even human," the man spat, reconsidering whether he should bother with poor families like Liang's. Just then, someone appeared out of nowhere and spat in the man's face, both literally and figuratively. The stranger reminded him of his past actions. When Liang's father died, he refused to help carry the coffin. When Liang was starving, he wouldn't spare a single grain of rice. And when family assets were divided, he had schemed his way into taking the largest share, leaving Liang's father with nothing but dust. The man refused to accept these truths, demanding to know why they were siding with Liang now. "I still have more authority than all of you," he shouted, attempting to stand and intimidate them. But another figure emerged, declaring, "Now that Liang is successful, you show up like scavengers begging for scraps." With the help of 2 others and a cane, they drove the man away. Once he was gone, Liang thanked the neighborhood chief for helping remove the pest. In return, the chief made a request. He wanted Liang to serve as the master of ceremonies for the upcoming river festival. Accepting the role would make Liang a priest leading the festivities, a perfect opportunity to uncover more about the festival's purpose. Seeing the potential, Liang agreed. All he had to do was memorize a few ritual phrases. The next day at sunrise, someone called for him. Liang, exhausted from a night of memorization, dragged himself to the door. Despite his fatigue, he was motivated. After all, he had been reincarnated, and now, as a student of the ancient temples, he had a new purpose. He then heads to the old man's mansion. In the mansion, we find him reading a book while leaning. On the other hand, he realized it was sad to stay here because he would have to memorize everything he said. After all, he wasn't sad about that. In fact, he was sad that he would have to memorize this in an elementary school. However, a brat right next to him points in his direction and starts touching the guy, commenting that he was talking too loudly, which makes the teacher annoyed with him. Even though a few days ago the teacher had been a pain to deal with, struggling to get him to enter this elementary school, it had been really hard to enroll him. So he should behave and should also be grateful to the teacher for having someone to teach him everything. After all, the teacher understood that he basically knew nothing. Yes, he knew he was losing the argument, but there was one thing. He had lived a life in the past and remembered his past life. He had studied, and to do this, he used a little of his study potential from that past life, applying it here. His goal was to protect the weakest people. Not only that, but he also intended to gain more knowledge from this teacher. Most likely, though, it wasn't because the teacher's knowledge was insufficient, but because it wasn't comparable to what he needed to teach. So he just needed the teacher to adjust his methods slightly, to give the children a much better future, as his current teaching was very weak. However, upon saying something like that, the teacher got angry. After all, the teachings he was passing down had been inherited for generations, but he had knowledge that could improve them. He then clarified that he didn't mean to belittle the teacher's work, as the effort he was putting in might not be as effective. The way the Funk Academy was teaching the kids was far more effective and also quite complex, requiring deep knowledge of certain characteristics. However, the method he had developed transformed those characters into simple symbols, with each symbol representing a specific pronunciation. The way he explained it was a simpler version of what the Academy was teaching. While he was explaining this, another figure appeared. Si Hang. When he arrived, he was completely curious and ended up asking if he could teach them a bit more of this knowledge. The teacher, now referencing him with respect, allowed it. After a long time, he began explaining, finding it all interesting. But the teacher still thought it was stupid. They couldn't just change something the past heirs had created. Yet again, Si Hong interrupted, and the teacher ended up declaring that he had just made a great discovery. Because of this, he could go to the great Shogu dynasty, where he would receive a reward. After all, there was a system for rewarding those who created something useful for humanity. He also began thinking that sooner or later, people would notice his uniqueness. The only way to avoid suspicion was to stand out a little more with his own projects. However, he called for Leang and asked if, by any chance, he could study privately with him. Liang, however, wondered what the purpose was. After all, he was far inferior to him. He remarked that it made no sense. There was no difference between the treatment at a warrior academy and here. But his master had told him not to worry about his own thoughts, but about those guys up there. He assured Liang not to worry, because he already knew a method to escape dangerous or risky situations. After all, the things his students couldn't question, he would question. And the things they couldn't overcome, he would overcome. Then he turned to Liang and asked if he might want to become his student. Liang, on the other hand, bowed and accepted. As he bowed in acceptance, the scene shifted to inside a lake, where we found Liang's pet crocodiles playing with a ball. The three of them played freely, but Chunky found it the most interesting. He asked one of them to throw the ball with all its strength. Finding this amusing, the crab did just that. It lifted its little paw and launched the ball as fast as possible toward Chunky. Chunky, aiming to catch it, failed because it was too fast. Instead, he was struck by it, thrown backward at high speed. In the end, he managed to grab it, but in doing so, he collided with something mysterious. That something turned out to be a bell, which cracked upon impact, and as it cracked, a mysterious glow emerged from within. Now that it has cracked, another hour later, we find Liang inside the lake. The crocodile ends up guiding Liang to a certain place because he had something interesting to show him. However, he was also happy about the victory he had achieved in the volleyball and water fight, using that ball made of vines, so he asks his pet to show him the tunnel they dug. After a while, Liang finally arrives. Then he wonders if, by chance, this was the place they had managed to dig. To demonstrate what happened, the crocodile ends up mimicking the same action that Chunky did, which irritates Liang a little. He understands that the crocodile did a good thing by showing everything, but now they intended to go inside. However, every time he got closer, he found the texture of the vines too strange. Curious, he grabs one of the vines and, after holding it, bites into one. He immediately spits it out, unable to even scratch the tough surface. Realizing he can't bite through it, he decides to climb instead. Once he reaches the top, he notices that there was no more water up there. Now that he's here, he sees that all those vines seem to converge at this point. While he's thinking about this, one of the mysterious centipedes appears from behind. The creature jumps and lunges at Leang, who quickly dodges. Because of his evasion, the centipede crashes into some rocks. After a moment, it gets back up. Leang is grateful that the centipede is slow, but then he realizes it's an aquatic centipede. As he processes this, the centipede jumps toward him again. But this time, the crab on Liang's shoulder reacts, using its little claw to block the centipede's attack. Now that the threat is halted, Leang notices that the crab's claws seem to have grown slightly larger. Realizing the danger, he considers fleeing, but before he can, the crab swiftly grabs the centipede. Impressed, Leang praises the crab for its quick action. Moving closer, he examines the aquatic centipede and, drawing from his knowledge, recalls that its strength and bite are terrifying. More importantly, they possess a venom feared even by martial artists. Looking at it now, he considers taming the centipede as a pet. Discarding it would be a waste. It could serve as a secret weapon. Besides, with his toughened skin barrier, he's strong enough to handle any risk. He picks up a sharp rock, cuts his finger, and places the bleeding wound near the centipede's mouth. As he does, a blood talisman appears over the creature. However, the centipede's strength surpasses even the crocodile's. The system warns him of its innate danger, but after a prolonged struggle, he finally tames it. Now that it's his, he names the fierce centipede Wei. But another realization strikes him. To level up this centipede, he'll need to spend 10,000 water essence. The staggering cost leaves Liang shocked. Each new pet he tames seems to demand more resources. He recalls eating a spiritual water mushroom earlier and wonders if more exist. The centipede suddenly scurries off, and Liang follows it to a hole where some vines are gathered. Strangely, he spots the shadow of a person inside. Curiosity pulls him closer, but all he finds is a skeleton. The skeleton clutches something in its hand, and nearby, words are etched into the ground. The writing tells of a vanguard general of the Navy who was defeated, gravely injured, and drifted here. Ashamed to face his majesty, he chose to end his own life in this very spot.
Of course, he wanted to understand a little, and our story continues shortly after he got closer to all those things that were happening. As he got closer, he continued to read a little more. However, the things that were written on the ground were practically disappearing, which meant he didn't end up understanding many things. If he is a warrior, Leang then begins to think that there must very likely be some weapons stored or thrown away nearby, or maybe even that mushroom over there holds something spiritual. Out of curiosity, he looks inside the box and finds some spiritual mushrooms. However, before he can leave, he will be taken to a specific place to be buried and given a dignified burial. Additionally, with that, he will finally be able to reach level 50. In the meantime, he sits there in front of his pets, who end up wanting to eat the mushrooms. However, Liang refuses. After resisting for a while, he takes a piece and devours it, finishing it a few minutes later. He feels completely light and soft, but then the system shows that he has just gained 216 points of water essence. He is surprised by this because even the crab eggs didn't give him that much. So, if he finishes and eats the whole mushroom, he will earn many more points. With that in mind, he ends up eating it. Later, he receives a message from the system. By leveling up, he has completed some missions, and with that, he also receives a new ability, aquatic jump. With this, he ends up feeling even stranger. A glow appears on his chest, and he realizes what this means. It makes him stronger. He approaches the exhausted figure on the ground, now just a skeleton, and refers to him with respect for having granted this new power. However, now with his new abilities, he sees a puddle of water and starts thinking that he should be using his powers underwater. We can see him using his new ability. By the way, it's very good. He can run very fast, but he can't control it well because in the end he ends up slamming into a wall. Besides, while the movement ability is impressive, it consumes a lot of his stamina. As for that ability, thousands of aquatic steps. If it really is real, this would be absolutely insane. But this time, his aquatic ability increased slightly. Before, It was 150 grams, but now it has risen to 400 grams. A last burst of strength was saved, while his creatures each grew by 200 to 500 points. Among his animals, his beloved little crab had a much greater evolution, which surprises Leang greatly, especially because the calculations he made don't even match the evolution his pets underwent. But also, who had an evolution? Well, it's their bard. However, he doesn't think too deeply about it because he shouldn't dwell on it. The Rio Festival is about to happen, so he'll use this time to study with some masters there. He also has a bad feeling about what will occur at this festival, so he knows he should get a little stronger. A week later, the village is calm, until someone approaches Liang's house, warning him that the Rio Festival is today. Leang calls for the centipede, which crawls onto his hand and transforms into a bracelet. With that, he goes to the door and opens it. After all, today, he should be attending the Rio Festival, and so, he arrives at a certain place where several people are gathered. Among them is a little girl who, out of nowhere, starts crying while walking with her mother. Confused, the mother approaches her daughter and asks what happened. The girl points in a direction and says there was a monster there, but when they look, they find nothing. Since she doesn't see anything, the mother tells her to stop telling stories, and they leave to enjoy the festival. Meanwhile, the scene advances further, and there we find the monster the girl had just encountered. This monster spoke of immortality, yet it called for Leang, thirsty to find him. The scene changes to the festival, where everyone was happy, beating drums and offering animals as sacrifices to the river god. As we look around, we find a man carrying a haystack with smoke billowing from it. He urges Leang to go ahead, as his goal was to reach the stage and deliver a beautiful speech to the crowd. With his goal achieved, Leang begins climbing the stairs. Only after a long time do we see, down below, the same man from before, still holding the haystack, announce that the festival was about to begin. Leang takes a scroll and starts speaking, addressing a certain river god, urging it to calm down. As he speaks, we see Liang's two friends below, both looking up at him. They realize that Leang is now at a vastly higher status than them. They wonder what happened. After all, they grew up together. Shouldn't they be equals? While they ponder this, Leang remains 100% focused, reading from his scroll. Meanwhile, atop some nearby houses, the monster from earlier reappears. It crawls stealthily across the rooftops until it finally spots Leang. Sensing its presence, Leang recognizes it. This was the ghost of the mountain, the very creature Brother Lu had warned him about. These monsters have rocky skin, resembling tree bark, just as described in the legends and illustrations of the Romotang oddity. During the commotion, the little girl from before suddenly freezes. Once again, she notices the monster's presence and screams, calling for her mother. Her mother, confused, doesn't understand what's happening. The creature, perched on the roof, suddenly leaps down, landing on the ground below. Chaos erupts as people scatter, shouting for others to run. Leang yells at the girl to get away as fast as possible. The little girl, disoriented, searches for her mother, while her mother, equally lost, stumbles around in confusion. The monster prowls through the crowd until it spots the girl again and charges toward her. Leang, seeing this, sprints to intervene, but he realizes he won't make it in time. Just as the situation turns dire, the girl's mother watches in horror as the beast closes in. But before it can strike, one of Liang's friends dashes forward, faster than Leang himself, and snatches the girl to safety. "Hold on," he tells her. "Just a little longer." Meanwhile, the monster shifts its focus and lunges at the rescuer. Seeing this, Liang's other friend springs into action. Drawing the dagger he had trained with, he hurls it at the creature. The monster dodges, proving itself both smart and agile. Realizing his mistake, and that he can't reach his friend in time, he watches helplessly as the monster prepares to strike. The friend, cornered, screams for Leang, wondering when he'll appear. At that moment, Leang unleashes his new ability. Harnessing his power over water, he forms a massive fist from the air above and slams it down with full force. The impact cracks the ground beneath, crushing the monster beneath the blow. Finally, Leang arrives, panting, sweat beading on his forehead, relieved to have landed a hit, but bracing for what comes next. But to understand how he got there so quickly, we need to go back a few minutes earlier. We found Leang saying that it was late. He wouldn't be able to get there in time. Until then, out of nowhere, he finds a jug completely full of water. As he looked at it, he realized that it was river water. But nevertheless, he needed a lot of water. This might not be enough. However, he can't give up now. To do so, he ends up putting his hand out and asking it to rise. Then, after a long time trying to control the water, he gets what he wanted. He ends up picking it up and throwing it toward them. Our hero's friend is surprised by this, and only later do we find Leang now facing him, preparing to punch. After he prepares it, he ends up hitting it squarely, smashing the monster back into the ground. Then, arriving in time, we see Liang's friend, scared, wondering how he managed to do this. He can't be explaining this now, so he asks him to get the little girl out of here. He ends up agreeing but says he'll come back later to help. Now that everyone has left, Leang ends up wondering where that thing went. He stops because the ground was completely covered in smoke. After a while, he realizes that the monster was no longer there. Only later do we find him now behind Leang. He prepares one of his claws, and only then does he prepare a blow that almost hits him. But Leang uses his arms to defend himself from its attacks. Even while defending, he realizes that this monster was very strong. He knew that he couldn't afford to be caught by it anymore, so he starts dodging its blows. Even so, the monster advances. As it does, Leang thinks that at some point there would be an opening, and after a while, he finds his chance. Only then does he prepare a blow, and after readying it, he lands that strike on its face. Afterward, taking the little girl a little further away, they end up coming back with the objective of helping Leang, saying that now they will assist him. Thinking about this, he believes he can immobilize the monster for a few minutes. After restraining it, he tells them to attack the monster's joints, not random places. So they do. The two of them land a blow in a specific spot on the monster, and only after striking there does the monster start screaming in pain. Once all this is over, Leang even asks the monster if this will be enough to knock him down. After saying this, he kicks it in the face, making it stagger back. However, he calls for his Xeno, the centipede. That centipede comes out of his arm and once released, goes toward the monster, striking its neck. Meanwhile, Leang comments that the Xeno's poison is no joke. This time, he might actually defeat it. The monster, after being bitten, feels the sting and roars in pain. However, behind it, we find several people who were just watching, knowing that prying into other people's lives, meddling in others' affairs, was not good. Then, the monster turns toward them. Its objective, of course, was to advance on them. Because we know one thing is certain. This monster recovers by devouring people. The guys are terrified when they see that thing approaching. Leang, witnessing this, realizes that the monster is targeting weaker people. So he picks up a stake from the ground and, with all his strength, lifts it. Only after gripping it does he manage to quickly hurl it toward the monster. Of course, it gets impaled. The dagger that was already stuck in it now has the stake lodged on top. Yet, it's still not enough. Such a blow wouldn't take down a strong monster like this. So Leang advances and, with his knee, delivers the final strike. This blow is enough to crush and completely shatter the ground. The creature screams in pain as Leang says that maybe it's all over. However, the thing shrieks about immortality at the same time. Now that everything is over, we find some people below terrified by what happened. Some even wonder if the river god was punishing them. Others question what kind of monster this was. Liang's friends approach afterward, wondering if this conflict will continue. Where could this village live in peace knowing this threat? The monster then declares that this wasn't all they wanted. They had imagined this was a gift. Leang, on the other hand, says that this was a blessing for Yexing village. Leang then takes the dagger, moves toward the monster, and severs its head. He shows the villagers the monster's head and declares, "This is an offering for the river god." Right after he talks about this, we see below the system saying that River's sacrifice has ended. River's favor ended up increasing from 0.001% to 1%, and our story continues right after he crushed that monster and used its head as a reference to the river god. After the reference was given, we then found some people surrounding the rest of that monster. While surrounding it from behind, we found our protagonist, who was watching there. At the same time, he needed to break the first skin barrier in a short time to be able to defeat that monster. The second, his synchronization rhythm increased quite a bit, and now his physical strength far surpasses martial artists who are still in the initial skin barrier. Before, he always lived barely alive, but now he has become something significantly interesting, something for society. The third factor was Zeno's poison, and without it, he probably wouldn't have been able to get where he did. But the most important thing is that he managed to obtain the favor of the river, which ended up evolving his innate ability to a very high level. The aquatic leap can evolve into a divine ability, the divine water bird of Miles, when the favor of the river is obtained. It is exactly as I expected, but he still got very few points in the river's favor. After a while, the village chief appears and calls the doctor to check on Leang to see if everything is okay. He approaches and realizes that Leang was becoming an extremely powerful person. He just had to follow the right path, and he would be able to get what he wanted so much. He thanks him, but then asks him to take care of his wound. The doctor does so, but at this moment, while picking up his cloak, he realizes that the material is extremely good. He even asks what kind of material was used in this. Leang explains that it was his second oldest brother who gave it to him, and that it was made with the skin of the bear dog, which resists as if it were steel. The doctor, on the other hand, realizes that not even using this armor would he be able to defend himself against other strong opponents, so he must become strong. Furthermore, Leang managed to break through the skin barrier. Speaking of which, the people who were there then approach and wonder if he really managed to do that. Everyone starts to get happy because now he could bring glory to their villages. Then, a friend of Leang appears and comments that the true martial artist has just risen. Looking at him now, he realizes that he won't be able to catch up with him anymore. However, that guy from before appears and comments that the boy has become extremely strong. He then wonders if Leang is basically going after him. But he is interrupted by the old man, who ends up wondering if he knows anything about the monster that has appeared here now. He says that everyone must be worried about it and then comments that the monster has a name. It is called the Mountain Ghost, a creature that feeds on blood. It was probably drawn here by the bloodlust of the crowd. He adds that he cannot confirm if there are other mountain ghosts lurking around, even though 3 appeared at the same time. He suspects that something very likely will happen soon to his village. Another person looks at the monster's head and wonders if it looks familiar. They then realize that it looked a lot like Leang. Even Liang starts to look at it, because now that it's brought up, that guy did resemble Leang. He wonders what happened to him. Alchemy prosperity. Then he ends up kind of remembering what was said earlier. After recalling all of this, he should have realized before that alchemy can be much more than real in this world. But creating a ghost from the mountain is basically the real deal behind this. However, he calls for Xing and says that it is no small thing because he will need to go to Piang County to report everything to his master about this suspect who was basically inventing these mountain ghosts. But what about that guy who messed with Liang from the beginning? This was quite surprising. He will do this, but he will also do something to them. He basically wants an answer from them, no matter the cost. Already in the county, the next day, the wife of Liang's master appears and wonders what Liang wanted so much here. It was even rare to see Liang, but then he greets her and comments that he had something important to discuss with his master. A little while later, we see them sitting in a corner talking. He mentions that this incident with the mountain ghost may all be connected to the Zola estate. She, on the other hand, thinks he is too smart, and it is no wonder that his own master considers it a huge advantage to have him by his side. However, on the other hand, we see him wondering if she already knew this from the beginning. Then she laughs and tells him not to be so anxious. After all, he forgot who his master was. He is none other than Yang Dong himself, the only Tiger House kingdom in this place, here in Piang. Most likely, in an estate far away from Joel, we then find a very calm temple. At this moment, however, we see 3 people walking toward this place where they were going to meet. But as one of the 3 is walking straight and turns back, the moment he turns around, he gets a little scared and even falls to the ground. Now on the ground, he points in a direction and shouts so that everyone would look back and wonder what was happening, especially because now they were being attacked by something. From afar, we see everything that was happening. a gigantic sword appears from the sky, and this gigantic sword goes toward that certain place. The guy who was on the ground only saw that thing approaching. The one who really did all this was Liang's master, Yang Dong, one of the owners of these places that he basically almost owns. He came kindly, personally asking them to surrender right away. Before anything can happen there, the scene returns to the same place where Liang was before. Here, he is seen in the dark night, training. He hides as much as he can on a piece of wood and comments that 2 days have already passed on the master's property. The lady even told him to stay in Martial Hall so he wouldn't interfere with his own master's plans. She also gave him a bar worth 2,000 yuan so he could at least pay for the estate's daily expenses. Soon after, we see him surprised by the large amount of money given to him. However, thanks to the piles of flesh restoration, the lady's injuries healed much faster than normal. Yet, the master and the lady suspect that the cult, the Ghost Mother cult, launched a large-scale attack on martial artists in the hall to refine more pills. That's why they're keeping Liang there purely for safety. After a while, he finishes his last daily training. However, as soon as he does, something quickly flies toward him. Liang, noticing this, swiftly raises his hand, grabs a rock, and throws it as hard as possible, cracking the wall. He then demands to know who's there, only to soon realize it was his brother, Junior. He also acknowledges that his own vigilance was quite high. Junior admits he came as quickly as possible upon learning Liang was there, wanting to see him up close and observe his training. However, the topics they discuss are minor, which surprises Liang since Junior only returned today. Junior then invites Liang to train with him, throwing a spear in his direction. Liang catches it, eager to train, and resolves to fight seriously against his brother without holding back. He asks Junior to teach him some moves, skills, or techniques. As the fight begins, Junior picks up an orange, tosses it into the air, and directs Liang's attention to it. Meanwhile, he uses his spear to strike, but Liang blocks the move. The two engage in combat, and Liang eventually finds an opening. He considers counterattacking with his spear, but hesitates. Junior smirks, breaks Liang's stance, and ducks, avoiding any hits. Realizing he's at a disadvantage, Liang throws his spear aside, but Junior catches it. Junior then steps over Liang's spear and urges him to move faster. Finally, the orange falls to the ground, signaling the end of their sparring session. After the fight, Junior realizes Liang has broken through the skin barrier with his speed, confirming he has a pattern of destiny, something that astonishes Liang, who was unaware. However, Junior explains that one day, the pattern of destiny will fade, but he won't elaborate further since their master will teach him in due time. Still, they can't just stand idle, so Junior challenges Liang to another fight. Liang agrees, and they clash once more. After a long battle, Liang collapses, exhausted. As he sits there, Junior remarks that Liang's earlier claims about the Xiao property align with his own recent investigations. It seems something is off balance, as if someone is deliberately leaving traces behind, or perhaps Junior is just overly suspicious. He tells Liang to forget about it for now. Since Liang has broken through the skin barrier, Junior offers him a useful book called The Steel Strength Method, perfect for martial artists at the skin stage. He explains that martial arts techniques are divided into two categories, movements and strength techniques. Strength techniques involve channeling qi and blood, requiring deep control, something only top martial artists master. There's also an intriguing method for harnessing blood qi. Junior instructs Liang to finish the book first, then apply what he's learned in their next training session. Liang thanks him but then asks why Junior sought him out in the first place. Junior nearly forgets, but remembers he was sent to inform Liang that the special weapon he'd been waiting for was finally completed. Delighted, Liang celebrates, but the scene abruptly shifts to another location. Below, chains rattle as another monster, similar to the one that invaded Liang's village, lurks. Captured people are forced to follow a grim path. A guard, startled, recognizes a girl passing by as the same age as his daughter. Another man orders him to ignore her and move on. Elsewhere, a man reports finding crucial ingredients, though some exceptions exist. Rare materials meant for feeding a particular experiment. They must proceed carefully to ensure everything goes as planned. Inside a cell, frightened prisoners whisper in confusion. Below them, Another voice cries out for his young master. Scene shifts to another location. Spiritual weapons, as incredible as it may seem, have a spirit, and where there is spirit, there is also nature. Only those with furious arms can wield these weapons in their hands. But to reach perfection, it was necessary to forge it. Here, we see Brother taking the iron bar that Leang had. Only after preparing it does he place it in the fire. He needed to refine its essence and increase its resistance. Having completed the first steps, it was now time for the second, activating the latent energy inside the feather core and letting it be absorbed by the tungsten steel. And now, we see that the steel, once an ordinary material, has transformed into something else. To achieve this, he must use a type of blood that is somewhat foreign. With that, he can now complete the tip of Leang's spear. At this point, all he needed was the final ingredient, the host's blood. Our hero, standing beside him, simply agrees. He takes his knife and makes a cut, just enough. Then, he approaches his weapon below and lets a single drop fall upon it. The moment the blood touches the steel, a phoenix emerges. He then takes a piece of the spear, fits it into place, and transforms the material into a fully functional weapon. Though the spear now carries Leang's blood, he cannot let it go unused. To finalize the process, he must exert a little more strength. He takes Leang's spear and, with a single forceful push, channels all his might, succeeding in what he set out to do. Then he declares that everything is complete. From afar, he observes his creation. A powerful and finely crafted weapon. He picks it up, realizing its considerable weight, yet finds it manageable. With a few practiced movements, he finally wields the weapon with confidence. Holding it now, he feels a strange connection between himself and the spear. But to truly master its power, he must train further. Moving to an open space, he demonstrates the weapon's capabilities, executing swift and precise strikes. In the background, his brother watches, praising him. Now that he possesses this weapon, he decides to name it. He considers calling it Fubo, but just as he does, another figure appears, also praising Leang. Surprised, he wonders why his older brothers are here. They explain that their master sent them to investigate. During their mission, they stumbled upon a room with several girls. While admiring them, they overheard a crucial clue, the location of the Great Mother's hideout. At first, he considered leaving immediately, but he decided to stay and enjoy the company. After some time, he obtained the information he sought. The hideout was near the Manhwa Temple. Now that they had the location, they could launch an attack and complete their master's mission. Turning to Leang, he remarks that Leang seems eager for battle, meaning he won't be able to avoid the coming fights. As he speaks, another person interrupts, preventing him from saying more. Leang, however, agrees without hesitation. The next day, he will go to the Manhwa Temple to gather more information. Scene shifts to another location. Here we find Xiao approaching his grand experiment. Examining it closely, he realizes his creation has reached its peak. Now, without a doubt, he will achieve everything he desires. But as he looks upon it, a grim thought crosses his mind. Had he not transformed into this monstrous state, he might have abandoned it in his quarters. Instead, he turns to his son and commands, "Help your own father achieve immortality." The scene returns to the same place again. There, at the entrances, we again find other people, or rather other women, being taken to this same location. Looking at today's treasure, it will be a pretty high sacrifice, and it seems they should enjoy it a little. But their boss orders them not to keep interrupting his superior's plan. Irritated by this, he continues with the preparations. After a while, we see Leang and his group. It seems this must be the place where Shui ended up, as mentioned before. But it's also a good thing that their own master left behind some beautiful dogs. This dog here helped them get to this place, but it suddenly gets irritated by something and starts barking. Leang tells it to stay calm. Otherwise, it would attract attention. Eventually, the dog settles down. However, Leang asks where his older brother went, but no answer is given here. He picks up an arrow, takes a breath, and takes aim. Only after he aims do we see the arrow fired. It strikes a guy who was harassing the captured girls. Once the arrow hits its target, a ray of light appears, and the man is thrown with full force against the wall. Now, against the wall, The man orders everyone to gather since they were attacked from somewhere. He then calls for Leang and commands him to follow. Leang hears this, and we see everyone moving forward. As they advance, an explosion occurs, and from within, Liang's older brother appears, now surrounded by the extras from before. From afar, Liang watches him and realizes his strength is extremely great. His older brother tells him not to stare and orders him to move forward, as he'll need his help. Then, we see him charging toward the extras. With a few movements, he knocks one down. Others appear behind him, but arrows suddenly fly in, helping him. He turns and thanks his brother, who doesn't respond but understands everything. The fight resumes. Meanwhile, Liang is surrounded. Some mock him for using a spear, claiming it's meant for open spaces. But as soon as they taunt him, Liang lunges at them and manages to knock a few down. Surprised, they hesitate, but it's no use. With a few more moves, he clears the entire row of extras. Now that everything is over, his older brother instructs Liang to go to the back of the place and find the remaining hostages. Advancing further, they find some people running in the back, especially for ruining what was supposed to be perfect. He feels he messed it up from the beginning when he made jokes with a certain person. This only fuels his frustration because certain things shouldn't have happened. Furious, he crouches down, trying to get closer to see what was happening to his friend. Then, he gets up, grabs a sword, and makes a cut. He mutters that Zung is still around. He wants to save his family. Surrounded, they encounter that same man from before, who demands the release of all the ghosts from the mountain so they can attack the invaders who tried to ruin his plans. In the midst of this chaos, feels like he's fallen into some kind of trap. In a mess like this, he doesn't even think about escape, but he needs an opportunity. Maybe this is the moment to test that thing. Using it, he might buy enough time to flee through the secret tunnel. He still has a chance to turn the tables on those invaders. While he was talking about the invaders, the scene shifted back to them. They had finished taking down the remaining enemies in the area. Now that they were done, they began wondering where Liang was. His older brother commented that Liang had gone to rescue the remaining hostages trapped inside. Looking around, he thought he would be able to finish everything quickly, but he also worried about something else. The blood in the air was too thick, as if something very dangerous lurked nearby, waiting for the right moment to attack. Meanwhile, Liang walked through the forest, his little dog leading him to a certain place where he would encounter danger. Moving forward, he found a tunnel and wondered what it was. He then realized the family dog was sensing something dark inside. Feeling it too, he placed his hand on the door, which opened, only to quickly shut behind him. Now trapped in a completely dark enclosed space, the system suddenly appeared before him, announcing that if he completed the mission, defeating the mountain demons, he would gain extra rewards and increase his underwater attack power. Surprised, Liang wondered if these were secret system missions. As he pondered, the family dog noticed unknown creatures approaching. Alerted, Liang saw them, monsters like the ones that had attacked his village. But this time, there were many. However, he saw an opportunity. Defeating them was his only way out. He couldn't hold back. Preparing himself, he emanated an aura. Thanks to Zeno, his body had strengthened quickly, and his recent training had sharpened his skills. Still, he wondered how far this would take him. When a monster attacked, he crushed it against the wall with a swift kick. The system counted it as his first defeated mountain demon. But it wasn't over yet. Grabbing his spear, he hurled it, piercing another monster. The system counted it as the second kill. One after another, he took them down until only one remained. Standing over the last demon, Liang felt tense, but the battle wasn't finished. The second round began as more remnants of the mountain demons attacked. In the chaos, one monster was thrown back and Liang speared it from a distance. Advancing toward a door, two more demons appeared, but he swiftly knocked them both down with his spear. Just as he thought it was over, he sensed a presence behind him. A voice called his name. Liang couldn't believe who he was seeing. It was that guy, the one who always smelled like fish, achieving things he never thought possible. The man smirked, saying he had a gift for Liang and told him to look. It was Lu, his son's disciple, who had come personally to save him. Realizing this was Instructor Lu's father, Liang grew serious. Lu taunted him, saying his older brothers were nearby and that his days were numbered. He might as well give up. Suddenly, something massive emerged behind Lu, dwarfing the previous mountain demons. Liang shouted for it to come at him. This fight would end with only one victor, and he challenged it to finish him off first. Outside, we found the three brothers, who had finally finished their work of taking down the other monsters. From the outside now, they were running toward Liang. As he ran, he commented that in this place, there were some low-ranking mountain demons, and for Liang, they wouldn't pose any trouble if he encountered them. However, he also feared facing monsters far stronger than those weak mountain demons. As he thought this, the scene shifted to Liang. This one was different. Ever since being reborn in this world, things had been difficult, but now they were even harder. Looking at the strength and size of this monster, it was clear that this mountain spirit possessed power close to the realm of the swift ride. Dark thoughts filled his mind. What if I run away? But he quickly dismissed the idea. He gripped his spear, but the moment he did, the monster rose and charged at him. In that desperate moment, Liang's past flashed before him. Memories of a life in a wheelchair. Yet he refused to let his past weaken him. If I didn't fear my past, why should I run from this monster? He stepped forward as the beast lunged, striking wildly. Most attacks missed, but one brutal blow connected, sending Liang crashing back. The monster pursued, closing the distance and rearing its fist for another strike. Meanwhile, Xiao watched in shock, wondering how Liang had grown so much in just 6 months, but it seemed futile. The monster rose again, advancing as its master coldly ordered, "Finish him quickly!" Liang steadied his spear and thrust, but the strike wasn't enough. The monster countered, slamming him into a wall. Injured and pinned, Liang struggled to rise as the monster's master laughed, mocking his hopeless situation. Then suddenly, a system screen appeared, announcing that Liang had defeated enough monsters to earn a favor from the Lord of the Mountain. The system offered him a choice. Merge the spirit you've obtained. With no time to hesitate, on the brink of death, he accepted. Instantly, he was teleported to another dimension, his body frozen as a mysterious figure materialized before him, calling out to a sovereign god. The entity recited cryptic verses, accusing Liang of breaking rules and demanding he surrender the dragon. When Liang refused, the sovereign god declared a designated attack. But before it struck, the scene snapped back to reality. The monster's master sneered down at Liang. "You came all this way just to die by my hand. Did you really think you'd leave alive? You could beg, but even that won't save you." He commanded his monster to deliver the final blow. As the creature reared its fist, Liang's eyes suddenly blazed with light. The ground cracked beneath them, a shockwave hurling the monster back. "What's happening?" the master gasped. Liang rose, his glowing eyes locking onto the group. But to understand this transformation, we must revisit the past. We see Liang with his master, training, but Liang has a doubt. This was about how strong the Oven Emperor would be, to which his master responds that he doesn't know, because today, no one has even seen a person reach that level. And then, we see Liang finally reaching that level, the level people strive for. But Liang, out of nowhere, raises his fingers, and after he raises them, a glow appears there. Xiao, who was smiling until now, wonders what is happening. He now finds himself in a different dimension, as if he were standing before a ghost. In this situation, they simply receive an order again. Xiao orders the monster to attack Liang, and so it does. The monster charges toward Liang, who simply stands still. But as the monster approaches, Liang takes his spear and makes a few swift movements, leaving deep cuts in its wake. The monster doesn't understand anything, but its master is happy, thinking Liang's attack failed completely. Then, he is shocked when the monster he created begins disappearing. He doesn't understand what's happening. His son, now in this monstrous form, turns around and moves toward his own father, Xiao. Desperate, Xiao runs toward him, trying to say his last goodbye, but he doesn't succeed. The monster vanishes right in front of him. Returning to the real world, Xiao now believes there is nothing left for him. What comes next? Before him lies Liang, collapsed on the ground from pure exhaustion. And of course all of this happened because of Liang. It was because of him that Xiao lost everything, including his strongest monster. Yao even considers getting up, but when he turns left, he sees an explosion. Immediately after, Liang's brothers appear, having finally reached another secret chamber. They advance cautiously and find Liang lying stiff on the ground. Concerned, they wonder what happened to him. They grab Liang to carry him out, examining his condition. It seems he fought something incredibly powerful. Meanwhile, the boss of the monster grows furious. Everything is going wrong. He tries to flee, but suddenly, several people appear, blocking his escape. With no other options, he watches helplessly as Liang's brothers prepare to take Liang away. Realizing they are leaving, Xiao also decides to escape through a secret exit. But just as he prepares to jump, someone calls his name from behind, a hooded figure. Startled, Xiao turns and recognizes him as Ling Yong. Ling Yong demands to know where his family is, gripping his necklace tightly. Xiao, overwhelmed with anger, snaps that perhaps his entire family was devoured by the mountain demon. As he says this, his fury grows uncontrollably. In a flash, he draws his sword and slashes sideways, striking Xiao down. After delivering the blow, Ling Yong leaves, muttering that there's still a chance his family might yet be alive.